Oh, nice, Teresa.
Good evening, everyone. This is a special joint meeting of the Moraga Town Council and Planning Commission. It's Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. It's 6 o'clock. Consistent with Government Code Section 54953, this meeting will be held by teleconference only and will not be physically open to the public. Town council members, planning commissioners, and staff will teleconference into the meeting by audio or video. The meeting will be conducted via Zoom webinar. To maximize public safety while maintaining transparency and public access, members of the public may observe the meeting by watching or listening to the meeting through live stream or through Zoom. Members of the public may also participate by providing public comment during the meeting by joining the Zoom webinar. Use the raised hand feature, and for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand during the public comment period for the agenda item on which you wish to speak. And since we are on Zoom, we will call the meeting to order and do a roll call. Let me start by welcoming the Planning Commission to this meeting. The council is ever so grateful for your service to this community and for the time, the effort, and the diligence that you put in to the task of being the technical advisory committee to the council. We appreciate your efforts, and we're happy to be participating in this meeting with you. So with that, let me call roll call for the Planning Commission. Commissioner Bodie.
Aye, here.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye, here.
Commissioner Helber.
Here.
Commissioner Polsky. Nick, you're on mute. Okay, we'll go back to him. Commissioner Thiel.
Here.
All right, Vice Chair Hillis.
Here.
Chair Luster.
Here.
All right, for the council, Councilmember Macker.
Here.
Councilmember Onoda.
Here.
Councilmember McClure.
Here.
Vice Mayor Wolicky.
Here.
Mayor Sauce is here. And one more time, Commissioner Polsky, are you with us?
I am. Apologize for that. I'm here
No
now.
problem. Glad you're joining. Thank you. All right. Next item is Pledge of Allegiance, and I would love it if Afsha Hamid, our planning director, would lead us in the pledge. Afsha?
Thank you. Okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Afsha. Next item, ordinances, resolutions, and requests for action. A, comprehensive advanced planning initiative. This is not an action item. This is an item in which we are being asked to listen, to learn, and then discuss and provide input on the housing opportunity sites and rezoning options. What I would propose that we do is first we do a presentation from Barry's and Cynthia's team. Then we will have questions from planning commissioners and council members. Then we'll open it to public comment and then come back after public comment and have commissioners and council members provide input into what they've heard and share feedback and give any additional ideas. Again, we're not taking action. We're not making any decisions tonight. We are basically holding what is a workshop that gives us an opportunity to provide feedback to our staff and our consultants on the direction in which this process is heading. And with that introduction, Cynthia and Barry.
Right. I just want to start by kind of putting tonight's meeting in context. You've received quite a bit of information about RHNA and housing opportunity sites and kind of the process that we're going to go through to look through rezoning and meet our numbers. And, you know, it can be kind of overwhelming. But tonight's meeting, as the mayor indicated, is not one where we're asking for specific direction regarding those exact projects or the sites. What we're really interested in is we're interested in your vision for the future. So the housing element is a chapter of the general plan, and it outlines kind of what the future of housing would look like for the next 8 years. Now, within that context, we've been given this 1,118 housing units that we need to ensure that there's zoning to provide for the development of. But the real question is, what do you want Moraga to look like in the future if that housing were to come? So I just wanted to start with that. And now I'm going to kick it over. I don't know if Afshar has anything to say or Barry, and they'll get into the details. But remember, we want to hear your vision for the future of development in Moraga.
Thank you, Town Manager. And Barry, if I may just say a couple things here. So as part of the housing opportunity sites, town staff has reached out to property owners. We've done that by sending letters. We sent over 300 letters last week to property owners. I've been getting a number of phone calls and emails, and I have tried as quickly as possible to return the phone calls and the emails. I've heard from approximately 25 property owners so far. I'm taking summary notes. So I will keep continuing to do that. I also want to just point out that as part of the overall project, we have created an online survey with a QR code. We are trying to get to Spanish-speaking, English-speaking, as well as Chinese-speaking individuals who do reside in the town. We're also trying to get to other sectors, renters, so that we can hear from renters as well. And we're continuing to contact the school district and workers who actually come to the town and work in the town but cannot live in the town. So we are trying to continue to get them involved in taking the survey. And from here, I will hand it over to Barry, so Barry can start the presentation.
Great, thank you, Afshar, and thank you, Director Battenberg. I'm going to share my screen and walk through our presentation. We have quite a lot of content we're going to share with you this evening, and we're going to leave you with 5 discussion questions. And then we will all be here to answer questions and take comments as those discussion questions come up. So let me go ahead and do the screen share and start at the beginning. Okay. So here are the topics we're going to be covering at today's meeting. We're going to start with just a quick recap of the housing element context and the needs assessment. There has been a needs assessment completed as part of the project, and I'm going to walk through some of the highlights. We put some of those in the staff report. There's much more to come in the future. We're going to do a quick recap of the regional housing needs allocation, or the RHNA, and then we're going to talk about the gap between how much land is currently zoned in the town to accommodate housing and how much more will be needed and what zoning changes we might need to be looking at to close that gap. Then we're going to go into a little bit about the inventory of potential housing sites and present you with some zoning policy questions. And as has already been stated, these are not questions about specific properties so much as they are questions about the vision for the future, where housing should be encouraged, what kind of housing should be encouraged, and so forth. We also have a quick summary of our community engagement process to date, and we're going to end with the 5 policy questions. So again, a recap of the Advanced Planning Initiative. The housing element is one part of a multi-pronged effort that we're going through right now that includes rezoning of key parcels, a focused update of the general plan that's being done in 2 phases, And the first phase is what we're doing now, which is looking at the safety element and the circulation element with updates to meet some state mandates and also to make sure that we have an internally consistent document if we change the zoning or general plan land use designation of any properties in the town. And then the second phase, which comes after the housing element is adopted, is updating the remainder of the general plan, which I can now say is 20 years old. Couldn't say that last year, but it is now 20 years old. We're also doing the rezoning of the Bollinger Canyon study area, which is a long-time objective of the town council and also something that's in the general plan. And then finally, a program level environmental impact report, which looks at the cumulative effect of all of these different components of the advanced planning initiative and the effect that those plans and policies may have on the environment, including measures to mitigate any potentially significant impacts. And that's all part of the advanced planning initiative. So shifting gears for a minute, I just want to walk through some highlights of the needs assessment. We're going to fill this slide and the next one with some data points that just to kind of take a step back for a moment, part of the housing element is a comprehensive analysis of the demographics, housing conditions, economy, income characteristics, and special needs of Moraga residents. This is something every city and county in the state has to do as part of this process. We have some new census data from 2020 that we're able to use and some other data sources that give us a good snapshot of where we are right now. And that allows us to really look at what our housing needs are and to come up with policies and zoning regulations that respond to those needs. So you see this statistic on the slide, which is that the town actually added little over 800 people during the 2010s. One thing that's significant about that is Moraga actually lost population between 2000 and 2010. That decline has been reversed and the town actually has 5% more residents now than it did in 2010. So importantly, that population growth was mostly due to larger households. There were only actually 110 housing units that were added during that decade. So if you think about the math, 110 units and 800 people, what was really happening was fewer vacant homes and a growth in the average number of people per household, more kids per household, more multi-generational households, and so on. The fastest growing age cohort in the town is 65 and over, which now represents 22% of the town's population. If you look at the age distribution of the population, it's flat or slightly declining for people who are between about 25 and 54. And it's growing at the high end of the age cohort as the baby boomer generation reaches retirement, and also at the younger end with a larger number of school children in the town. Moraga is becoming more diverse, not as diverse as the region or the county as a whole, but at this point, 62% of the town's residents are non-Hispanic white, which compares to 39% in Contra Costa County and 36% in the region. So the town, like the region, is becoming somewhat more diverse. And a larger percentage of our households are renters, although the margin is pretty small. If you go back to 2000, 16% of all of the households in Moraga were renters, and that's up to now 18%, still about half of the countywide average and less than the regional average, which is, I think, about 40% of the region's renters. So the housing element needs assessment also looks at income distribution and finds that 14% of Moraga's households are considered very low income. This is based on data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. That's a much smaller percentage than we see at the countywide and regional level. But the interesting thing is that most of the very low income households in the town are homeowners. You would ordinarily expect that that would be renters. But in this case, it's elder homeowners, senior homeowners, many on fixed incomes, many living in one-person households, perhaps a surviving spouse. And that really translates into a need for additional affordable or lower cost housing or options for seniors. We also found that many who live in Moraga are working in high wage positions that are located elsewhere. So the town is a net exporter. I should say it's a exporter of commuters, and there are more people commuting out than commuting in. But those who work in the town are often in lower wage jobs. There are about 6,000 jobs that are located in the town of Moraga. Many of those are retail, service, healthcare, administrative jobs that pay salaries that don't provide the means to live in the town. So we have an imbalance right now where those who are living in the town are working elsewhere, who are working in the town are living elsewhere, and there is a need for additional housing options for those who work in Moraga. Also, 13% of the town's households are paying more than half of their incomes on housing. That's a very high number, but it's actually not as high as the county, where it's 16%. That figure is higher for renters than it is for owners. We have about almost a quarter of the renters in Moraga are paying half of their incomes on housing. And that includes utility costs, homeowners insurance or renters insurance, and things like that. But the incidence is fairly high. This is no surprise to you and to anyone in the town, which is that there's been a very rapid increase in home values, particularly in the last couple of years. Home values have increased 125% from a median of 772,000 in 2012 to over 1.7 million in early 2022. So we've seen quite a run up in home prices and fairly limited options at the more affordable end of the range. Also, in looking at the data, one of the groups that faces the greatest housing challenges, as I mentioned earlier, are low-income seniors. So programs that create opportunities for more affordable senior housing or accessory dwelling units for older adults, or where an older adult may have a home care provider living in the house, or shared housing. These are some of the options that we'll be looking at as we move into the policy section of the housing element. So I'm going to keep moving through and get into the sites information shortly. To provide some context for that, this slide and the one after talk a little bit about the regional housing needs allocation. We have talked about this at a few prior meetings. It's essentially a process that works from the top down, where the state of California assigns a number of housing units to each region in the state for an 8-year planning period. In this case, HCD, which is Housing and Community Development, determined that the regional need for the 9-county Bay Area was 441,176 housing units. And the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, is responsible for allocating that total to more than 100 cities and 9 counties in the region. And they did that with a working group comprised of about 37 people that included elected officials and planning staff and housing advocates and so on, allocating that total to towns and cities based on the size of the community, their access to transit, the income profile of the community, and importantly, access to resources and opportunities in each community. So if you were a more affluent community, you tended to get a higher number. Moraga's assignment, as we've mentioned in the past, is 1,118 units. That total is broken down into 4 income categories. And so you can see those on the slide. When we are talking about low income housing, we're talking about housing that is affordable to people who are earning less than $109,600 a year if you're a family of 4. So this is our workforce we're talking about. This is many of our folks who work in retail or in restaurants or in the service industry or in construction and so forth that simply can't find a place to live in today's market. About 500 units of the total of our RHNA is associated with the low and very low income. So what kind of housing is expected to meet the needs of each of these income groups? We put this slide together just to illustrate that when we're talking about the above moderate income end of that spectrum, we're talking primarily about market rate single family housing. Moderate income, some of our market rate apartments, there's no affordability assistance. It's simply the fact that they're affordable by design, that many market rate apartments meet the need for moderate income housing. Smaller condos, Moraga does have a fair number of condominiums that are 1 and 2 bedrooms that are that meet the needs of moderate income residents. BMR stands for below market rate. So for cities and towns that have inclusionary housing ordinances that require that you set aside a certain percentage of units for with affordability restrictions. If you're talking about ownership housing, you're typically talking about BMR ownership. If you're talking about rental housing, those restricted units are going to be mostly for low, well, exclusively for low and very low income. And low income typically is built with assistance through various low income housing tax credit programs or through nonprofits and so forth. Many of our accessory dwelling units also serve to meet some of the low income needs. And then we have very low income housing, which is a segment of the lower income component. And that includes junior ADUs, small little sections of a house that might be partitioned off with just a studio or a bedroom and bathroom and so forth. And then housing that's specifically for persons with special needs that is subsidized. The box in purple on this slide is very important and really informs the next part of the discussion, which is that the state of California has determined that a site can only be considered adequate to meet the needs of low or very low income housing if it is zoned to allow at least 20 units per acre. So 20 units they consider to be the bare minimum for what is viable as a low income or very low income housing site. Now that doesn't mean that if you have a piece of land that's zoned for more than that it has to have lower income housing. It can have market rate housing, but it is where the opportunity to build lower income housing begins based on the state's data about what is being built that's affordable in the Bay Area and Southern California and other parts of the state. So we wanted to just show some examples from around the region of what that density looks like. These are all projects that are mostly in the 20 to 25 unit per acre range. You can see, actually, I should ask you to guess which one of these is the market rate project, because 4 of these are actually affordable housing projects. I'll answer the question, but it's the Lafayette project. This is the market rate project. This is affordable, 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 affordable. So we're looking at projects that really are fairly similar, 2 to 3 stories in design and fairly traditional, what I would describe as garden apartments at that density. The interesting thing is that we have this density in Moraga now. We haven't seen it constructed in the last 40 years in the town, but prior to incorporation, if you go back to the 1960s and 1970s, there was a fair amount of apartment construction on Ascot, on Donald, on some of the streets in the town that actually were in that density range. They look dated today. It's not the style of architecture we really like to see in new construction, but we have a precedent for density of this character, and most of this is reasonably affordable by design, at least to moderate income households. So this is not something that's never been seen before in the town or is unheard of in the town. It's actually a housing type that already exists in a fair number of locations and units. Okay, so we're moving now to the discussion of how do we move forward to meet that 1,118 unit target. And the first thing I want to point out is that we are able to subtract projects that are in what's called the development pipeline. So these are projects that have either already been approved or that are pending approval, that are being reviewed by planning staff right now, that have applications in. And right now there are roughly close to 400 units that are in that category, which we can subtract from that 1,118 units. We have to subtract based on the income categories that those units will serve. So we have no housing right now in the pipeline for low and very low income households, but we do have quite a bit in the pipeline for above moderate income households and some for moderate. The other point is that we can adjust our RHNA based on accessory dwelling units. We can make a reasonable projection of how many ADUs we think we're going to build in the town in the next 8 years. And we do that by looking at how we've been doing in the past few years. If you look back over 2018, 19, 20, 21, the town produced roughly 3 or 4 accessory dwelling units a year. Now, I'll tell you that's a fairly low number. I work with a number of other communities in the area, and they're doing more than that. So we're saying that we're going to produce 6 ADUs per year. It's a fairly low, somewhat aspirational, but not. It's certainly achievable and attainable by letting more folks know about the opportunity to build ADUs and encouraging people to take advantage of that opportunity. These are market rate units, but based on some research that's been done by ABAG, and they basically did a survey of something like 1,000 accessory dwelling units in the 9-county area and determined that 35% of those units were affordable to lower income, 50% to moderate, and 15% to above moderate. And the state has accepted that study as a benchmark or metric for cities to take whatever they project they're going to build in ADUs and allocate it accordingly. So we're basically saying we're going to build 48 ADUs in the next 8 years. It's an aspirational target. And we are going to assume this income distribution based on the ABAG study and subtract that from our total. So what we are left with is a remaining RHNA of 684 units. That includes 484 low, very low, 72 moderate, and 128 above moderate. So this becomes our task. We, as part of this process, looked at opportunities to build above moderate income housing on sites that don't have projects that are active and moving forward. And there are sufficient sites in the town right now to meet the rest of that need. There are vacant sites that are zoned that would allow subdivision. There are vacant lots that exist and so forth, so that we actually will meet that 128 unit of above moderate income housing without rezoning anything. And we're left again with that 484 low and very low, 72 moderate. That adds up to 556 units that are needed for very low, low, and moderate moving forward. So if only it was that simple and we could just say we're going to plan for 556 units. Unfortunately, it's not, because the state also requires that we add a buffer on top of our RHNA. And the reason for the buffer is that we don't know that every one of these sites that we're showing on a map is going to be either available. We also want to make sure that if one of these sites is developed with something else, that we still have enough remaining sites. HCD has basically said you need to add a buffer of 20 to 30% on top of your RHNA. And when you approve a project on a site that you've listed as a housing opportunity site, and that project is not an affordable housing development, then you need to show us that you still have enough capacity on your leftover sites to meet your numbers. So essentially, it's to the town's benefit to have this buffer, because what it allows you to do and what it allows property owners to do is build market rate housing on some of those higher density sites. And one of the things that we've heard and that we hear is we don't want all lower income on those sites. You don't have to have all lower income on those sites. You can have market rate units on those sites. We want market rate units on those sites. We just have to make sure that we at least are providing an opportunity for those lower and very low income units, which is why we have that buffer. The other thing behind the buffer is that some of these sites may develop with fewer units than we've estimated. And someone may come in and say, you know, I wanted to put a park in on this portion of the site, or there was something that caused us to not be able to build on this part of the site, so we're going to provide fewer units. So we need that flexibility. So when we add that buffer on to the deficit, we're left with about 800 units. And so the task that is before us is looking for where in the town can 800 units of housing be built at densities of 20 units per acre or greater. And I want to detach the conversation from affordability and lower income, because really that's the question, is where can we accommodate 800 units that are built at 20 units per acre or higher? And here's some ground rules for that discussion. First of all, we can't put them all in one place. There was a bill passed in 2017 called AB 686, which basically said, we're trying to deconcentrate poverty in California at the local level. The way cities and towns can help us with that is by not putting all their low-income housing in one place. So we want to see, this is the state saying, we want to see housing opportunities in different parts of the community. If you have multiple commercial districts, put some in one and some in the other, and so on. So that is one of our guiding ground rules here, is we're not going to put everything on one site or in one block or so forth. Avoid sites larger than 10 acres and smaller than 0.5 acres. This is actually written into the government code, that the state will not accept a housing site that's larger than 10 acres or smaller than a half an acre as being suitable for that lower income need, unless you provide data to them showing that you've had recent success building housing that's affordable on sites that meet those criteria. And it may not be within the town, but we'd at least have to look at some of our neighboring towns to see, has anyone in central Contra Costa County built an affordable housing development lately on a site that was larger than 10 acres? And if the answer is no, it's a hard sell to the state that a very large site will be acceptable to them. Prioritizing vacant sites over those with active uses. I think we know we have to include some sites that have active uses, but it's certainly easier to develop a vacant site than a site that's got development on it already. So again, this is a state guideline to look for vacant sites first. Sites where there's interest from the landowner. You don't necessarily need a letter from the landowner says, I support this designation, but it helps, and it does help, as Afshar said, to reach out to property owners and to let them know that this is going on and so forth. We have to assume realistic capacity, and that what that means is that we can't just say the site is zoned for 24 units or 20 units per acre, therefore it will develop at that density. We have to back off from that and say, well, maybe it'll develop at 80% or at 75% or at 90%. We look at some of the existing developments in the town and see how close they're coming in to the maximum and come up with an estimate that's a little less than that. And then you have a general plan, even though it's 20 years old, but it does focus development in two areas of the town. And that's the Moraga Center specific plan area and the Ream area, which even 2 decades ago were recognized as the places in town where we'd like to see growth focused, not on the open spaces, not on the hillsides, but in the commercial centers that already exist. So as part of this process, we've completed an opportunity site analysis. We've looked at the Contra Costa County tax assessor database for Moraga, which includes 6,100 individual records. It's a very large spreadsheet that has information on each parcel in the town. And we look at variables like what's the existing use, how big is the parcel, is it vacant or occupied, what's the value of the improvement on the site related to the value of the land on the site, what's the size of the building relative to the floor, to the site area, what year was the building built, are there multiple parcels under one ownership, and went through this process of sifting that 6,100 down to a much smaller universe of parcels, which we looked at through step 2, which is looking at aerial photos, going out to each site and looking at them and seeing what are the constraints, what are the opportunities here. Is the site for sale? Is it for lease? And is anything proposed on it, or has anything been proposed on it recently? And this is where staff's knowledge of development applications and kind of the institutional knowledge of what's come before in the town is really helpful. So 2 policy documents that are important. First, the Moraga Center specific plan. You are all familiar with this plan. It was adopted in 2010 but the implementing zoning was adopted in 2020, and this is really seen as a way to focus the town's growth and meet housing needs in a more sustainable way, including mixed-use development that combines housing over retail or office, creates more of a town center feel, and this was studied for 510 new housing units at the time. And there was an environmental impact report that was done for that project, and zoning adopted, which anticipated 510 new housing units within this area, a slightly higher number if some of those housing units were for seniors. The other area, and this isn't the planning document other than the general plan, but it's an area of Moraga where there is policy support for additional housing and somewhat additional density as well. The general plan, although the land use designations currently don't permit housing, the policies in the general plan called for housing in this area and suggested that a more detailed plan be done for the Ream Center. Also looking at those affirmatively furthering fair housing rules that were on an earlier slide, we know that we can't put a housing element together that only creates housing opportunities in the Moraga Center specific plan area. We have to look at the Ream Center as a secondary location. And the question is how many units, what's the distribution between the Ream area and the MCSP area? And that's one of the policy questions we'll be talking about. So I'm going to keep going if it's okay. Let me just take a quick pause to see if anybody has we're going to do lots and lots of questions at the end, but I just want to take a quick pause if anyone's waiting to speak immediately. All right.
I just wanted to ask one thing. For ground rules, I didn't see on ground rules on the slide 17, the point about the 20 units per acre
Right.
requirement. So is that a ground rule or is that a recommendation?
It's a ground rule for those affordable sites, and it's actually the next slide. So
Okay.
that's coming right
That's
up.
fine then,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. So thank you for that segue. So the first policy question is regarding the 20 unit per acre rule. The state says that a site may only be considered as a candidate for low or very low income housing if it's zoned for at least 20 units per acre. And I underline that word or those words at least, because if you have a zoning district where the maximum is 20 units per acre, technically that is at least 20 units per acre, but that's meant to be the floor and not the ceiling. And the state is basically saying, we want to see 20 units per acre as the middle of a range and not the absolute maximum that you can build. And most communities that are faced with this dilemma are using 24 units per acre as the top end of the range. And obviously 20 units per acre falls within that range. So what we would be doing in this case is we would be raising the maximum allowable density in the R20 zone from 20 units per acre to 24 units per acre. That way we can say to the state, you can build at least 20 units per acre in this zoning district. And we can make estimates of the capacity for our areas that have that zoning that go up to 20 units per acre. We would not be able to do that if we kept the zoning at 20 units per acre, because they would presume that the housing would be developed at a slightly lower density. What you see on the slide here is the area that's currently zoned R20A and R20B. There's one other parcel in the town that's zoned R20A, and that is off the map. It's just below the map. It's that 6-acre site on Country Club where there is an application under consideration to build multifamily housing. So this basically is the only site that would be remaining that is in the current housing element that was identified as appropriate for lower income housing. So we would be carrying this site forward as an affordable, as a low and very low income housing opportunity site with a density of 24 units per acre. Just for some background, again, I mentioned the site's now zoned for a maximum of 20 units. I think actually most of what I just said on the previous slide is repeated here. So I'm just going to skip down. The site still has issues as a lower income site. We are going to need to address the fact that this site is larger than 10 acres. So I mentioned earlier that one of the criteria the state has is they don't like to see sites that are larger than 10 acres. And this is actually at 18.5 acres. And it's, although it's divided by zoning districts, we are going to have to do some thinking as we present the case to the state that this is a viable housing site. The policy question, and again, we're going to come back to all of these questions at the end after we present all 5, is do we want to consider a higher density than 30 units per acre, which would yield 396 units on the site? The reason that was put out there as an option, and we only did that for this site, is because you can't currently get to 30 units per acre on the site under the current zoning if you build senior housing. So really the question is, since we were willing to do that for senior housing, would the town consider allowing that for all types of housing? And that would be a question for you to consider. Obviously, you get more units if you allow a higher density, and that reduces the need for units on some of the other sites. If you don't rezone the site and this is not considered a housing site, you pretty much have to make all the other changes that we're going to go over in the rest of this report or the rest of this presentation. Policy question 2 is, should the allowable density in the MCSP mixed use office residential zone also be increased from 20 to 24 units per acre, with the, we're calling them eligible sites counted as housing opportunity sites. Let me just go on to the next slide because this gives you some more context. This is a zoning district. I might flip back and forth between the two just for orientation. Safeway seems to be the point that everybody recognizes, but we're talking about parcels along Moraga Way, along Country Club, School Street. There's already a concentration of offices on School Street. Professional center over here on the east side of Canyon Road, Moraga Road, and the 2 assisted living facilities. This is the office residential zone. And what we're asking here is this an area where we want to seek out housing opportunity sites at 24 units per acre? There are a few properties in this area that are vacant. There are a few properties that are underutilized. Staff has received some inquiries from property owners about building on some of the properties in this area. Wanting to point out here that although this area is already zoned in a way that allows multifamily residential, the last housing element did not identify any sites in this area. And we've identified opportunity sites for roughly 140 units on properties within this area. So here are the density options that are presented: increase to 24 units per acre and count potential housing sites, leave at 20 and don't count housing sites in this area. And the third option requires its own slide that I'm going to talk about in just a moment, which is to drop the density standard. In other words, take out any requirement for density and allow housing in this area, but subject to a floor area ratio standard instead of a density standard. So I need to just take a pause and explain why we offered that third option, which is to use floor area ratio instead of density. So this is something that more cities and towns are doing, particularly where they're trying to encourage mixed use development, where housing might be located above ground floor commercial uses. And it provides more flexibility to a developer because you're not limiting the number of units they can build on the site. You're only limiting the floor area that they can build on the site. So if you look at this little illustration down here, this blue square is meant to be 1 acre of land. If you have a density limit of 24 units per acre, that means you can build 24 units on the site. Doesn't matter how big those units are, you just can't build more than 24. If you have a floor area ratio limit on that site instead, all that is telling you is that you can build, this is 43,560 square feet in an acre times that 1.25. All that's telling you is you can build 54,450 square feet on that site. It doesn't tell you whether those are 2,000 square foot units or 1,000 square foot units. You can put as many units as you want. You can put commercial in the building. All it is doing is defining a building envelope. So it provides more flexibility. There are some downsides to taking this approach, but I'm going to hold off on going into too much detail on this until we get to Q&A, just in the interest of time and getting through the remaining slides. But I just wanted to point out that that is another option on the table. So policy 3, and again, just for time check, we're going to go 3, 4, 5. We've got just a handful of slides, and then we'll be done with the presentation. This is the retail residential mixed use zone in MCSP, and it's really the same question that we are asking for the office mixed use zone. We're talking now about the parcels on the north end of School Street, north of the Safeway, on both sides of School Street. So we've got the RV area, the area where School Street doesn't quite go through to Moraga Road, the ball field batting cage area, and the open space that's next door, the Christmas tree lot, and so forth. So that's the area we're talking about. Housing is already allowed in this area, multifamily housing, but no housing sites have been counted in this area in the past and the current housing element. And again, we'd be looking at the need to increase the density to 24 units per acre. We've identified the potential for 230 units in this area. That's a pretty large chunk of the RHNA need. If you think about those sites, they're large, they're flat, they're relatively easier to develop than many of the other sites we looked at. They're mostly vacant. So these are pretty good housing opportunity sites. And I should point out too, the vision in the MCSP is that there is housing on this in this area, and this would not preclude mixed use with ground floor retail or ground floor commercial and housing above. In fact, I think that's really the desired outcome here. It's just a question of, can we count these sites or not? So here are the policy options. And again, they're the same as the options for Area 2. It's really a question of whether we want to encourage the listing of these sites as housing opportunity sites in the housing element with densities of 24 units per acre. So policy question 4 is slightly different than the last two. These are the areas of the MCSP where housing is currently not permitted. So if you look at the Moraga Center specific plan, housing is not a permitted use in the commercial district, which is most of the shopping center and the block where the hardware store is. And it's not a permitted use in the Moraga Ranch. On these two parcels on either side of Moraga Way at School Street or at the gas station at the corner of Camino Ricardo. It is not a permitted use under planned development unless there's an application that comes in to put residential in a planned development, but it's something that would have to go through a discretionary process. So the question really here is, do we want to create the opportunity for housing in these areas? And again, there are some development sites in this area. There are vacant sites. There are underused commercial sites in this area. There are opportunities for probably, I think this adds up to around a little over 170 units that we've identified. The actual potential number is higher because this was really focused on the vacant sites, as opposed to the underutilized sites. So the options we presented here are allow housing in all of the commercial zones, allow housing only in the commercial zone. I should clarify, housing in all zones means MCSP commercial, Moraga Ranch, and the planned development area. B is only in the commercial area, and C is don't allow housing in this area and continue the MCSP zoning, which is that you don't allow housing within your core commercial area. The other option we put out there is that you could also look at a density transfer option where you only allow housing if it's being transferred from another site in Moraga, where you may want to take the development rights and move them from that other site into the MCSP commercial area. And that's an option that's not currently permitted under your current zoning. It's only, you can only do density transfers to residential properties. So this would be creating an opportunity here. The last policy question, and this is about the Ream commercial area. And really the question here is how much residential development is appropriate in the Ream area. We have 3 zoning districts in this area, about 50 acres of land, about 60 parcels. And the 3 zoning districts are suburban office, which is the western end where you find a number of office buildings, the vacant lot next to the Ream Theater, the town offices. We have a community commercial zone, which is the entire shopping center, and then a few parcels on the north side of Ream Boulevard where 24-hour fitness is and the St. Mary's facility. And then we have a limited commercial area on the east side of Moraga Road, which is the self-storage. There's a dental office, medical clinic, fire station, and so forth. There's actually a vacant lot at Lucas Drive, which could be counted as a housing site. Not currently counted because residential is not allowed in any of these zones under current zoning. So the question here, again, I think I did all these talking points on my last slide. I want to come back to this AB 686, which is that we have to spread the housing around. We're recommending that at least 25% of your RHNA be accommodated in the Ream area. That's about a little over 200 units. And again, the general plan supports housing. We've had some inquiries from property owners in this area about building housing. So we know that the opportunity is viable here. It's just a matter of whether we recognize it and support it in our housing element. The 3 options we're putting out there are allow housing at 24 units per acre in all 3 zones, allow 24 units per acre only in community commercial and suburban office, or allow 24 units per acre only on specific sites that we identify within this zoning district. So we would basically say individual sites where we think there's an opportunity for housing would be identified with an overlay where housing could be built, but the rest of the area would be off limits for housing. So those are the 5 policy questions. The last handful of slides here, there are 2 or 3 that I just want to go through quickly. We're engaging the community in this question because if you think about it, what we're talking about doing is a balancing act between these different sub areas, not just between Ream and MCSP, but within Ream and within MCSP, there are sub areas where we're looking for feedback on what do folks think are the best opportunities, the best areas for housing? And ABAG has made this tool available to the town, which we're actually launching next Monday. It'll be live on March 7th, where residents can go on this using basically an app that you can use on your phone or on a laptop. And it's like you're given little board game pieces and you put houses on these different parcels and areas until you reach a target of 800 units. This screenshot that you see here is actually from Orinda, which is also using the same tool. Lafayette is using the same tool. Danville is using the same tool. So a lot of the communities are using this engagement tool to basically ask the public to weigh in on the question of how do we allocate our housing assignment in the way that's best for the community. Just a quick reminder of some of the upcoming and ongoing community engagement activities. We, in addition to the Balancing Act program, we're looking at having a community workshops on March 30th and 31st. That's tentative. We're nailing those dates down. At least one of those will be a daytime meeting and one will be an evening meeting. As Afsha mentioned, we're reaching out to property owners and meeting with stakeholders. We have the ongoing housing survey. I have another slide on that. We're doing outreach to community groups and have the project website and are doing newspaper articles, advertising for all of our meetings. We have the Make Moraga Home website. We've been meeting in the recent past with civic organizations. As you all know, we've had our Bollinger Canyon outreach, 3 Zoom meetings back in October, November, a number of council study sessions going all the way back to the Perrin wine booth when we started the project. So quick overview of our next steps. We will be coming back to you in mid-April with a draft list of housing opportunity sites and a review of the potential zoning changes that are needed on those sites. By May, we're going to be developing draft policies and programs for the housing element, and our goal is still to submit a draft housing element to HCD for their internal review by the end of June 2022, and to adopt the housing element in January of 2023. So last call for the housing survey. We're keeping this open until March 15th. I want to tell you all that we have had 550 responses to the survey as of today, including 13 that are in Chinese. So people are taking advantage. We have at least 1 or 2 that are in Spanish that we've heard that we've received. So people are taking advantage of the multilingual surveys as well, but a really good representation of the community. As we look through the results, we're seeing a lot of older folks and a lot of homeowners responding. So we're making a push to get some of our younger residents and some of our renters to take the survey as well. The QR codes that are on the screen can be scanned, and that'll take you to the website, or you can go to makemoraga.home.org and the link is there. Final slide. So we're just recapping the 5 policy questions. First, about the R20 density going up to 24 units per acre. Second, allowing 24 units per acre in the office residential areas of MCSP and looking at housing opportunities there. Third, allowing 24 units per acre in the MCSP retail residential, with some of those properties counted. 4, this question of whether housing should be allowed in the MCSP commercial, ranch, and planned development zones. And lastly, housing in the Ream Center commercial area, 1, 2, 3, or 0. Well, we can't say 0. I'd say 1, 2, 3 of those districts, or something more strategic where we identify sites to be rezoned. And with that, I will stop the screen share, and thank you all for indulging me. I know that was a long presentation. There was a lot of content to get through.
Thank you, Barry. All right, let's open this up to questions from planning commissioners and council members. There's a lot of you on the screen, so my apologies if I call on people who didn't raise their hand first. So it's whatever's my field of view. But I think Brenda, I saw your hand first.
Yes, thank you. This is with regard to the FAR option. 2 questions. Would the option of increasing the FAR then apply town-wide if you employ it, or can we make it specific to these newly zoned areas?
That's an excellent question, and you can do it either way. If you're changing, well, most of these zoning districts only exist in the areas that we're looking at. So you would be, if you're changing the FAR in community commercial, you're basically changing it in the in all of the community commercial parcels in the city, in the town.
Okay. And then my second question would be, can you give me an example of what an FAR build out might look like as opposed to a typical condo or apartment? Is that inside there are different units? Does it create more opportunity for sort of like character in the building and like, you know, different livable spaces, or what does that look like?
It could. Really what it creates is the opportunity to have a more varied mix of unit types, I would say. And it's an incentive for smaller units, because what happens when you use density is, you know, you're going to get the maximum. People want to build the maximum number of units. So if you allow 24 units per acre on an acre, you're going to get an application for 24 units. But if you base it on FAR, you might get smaller units. You could get more units that are 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet or 800 square feet. You're more likely to get those smaller units if you're using FAR. You will get more units in the total project, though, if you do that, because that's basically what the incentive is that it's a way you can put more units on a property.
So through the mayor, if I may,
Yes,
The determination for the number of units with FAR would be market driven. So, maybe it's determined in Moraga that you need more one bedroom apartments because we have more seniors or, faculty that need that type of unit. So it would be basically market driven.
Okay, thank you. And what are the drawbacks that you were about to get into?
I would say the drawback is there's a level of unpredictability about what you're going to get out of the project, how many units you're going to get, because you don't know if you're going to get 20 units that are 1,000 square feet or 10 units that are 2,000 square feet each. I mean, you're going to get a 20,000 square foot project, but you have no way of knowing how many units that is going to be. And sometimes it's helpful to know that, to have that information for forecasting and so forth. The advantage, there's definitely an advantage too, which is, it's really a way to build mixed use. If you're wanting to do a project with ground floor commercial and upper floor residential, you're offering that greater flexibility with a FAR limit.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
I saw Carrie and then Teresa.
Thank you very much. Had a couple questions. They might be easy for you to answer. One is, does student resident housing at a university count towards RHNA?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And the answer is it's complicated. Student housing, if it's a dormitory, if it's group quarters, definitely doesn't count. If it's individual apartments, it may count. If it's family housing for students, it usually counts. I'm doing some work in Albany. They're building student housing right now, and the state is not letting them count it. And those are apartments that have kitchens and bathrooms, but the only people who can live in them are students. Faculty can't live there, staff can't live there, the public can't live there, people can't live there with their families. And that's the reason they won't let us count those units. So it's really kind of a case-by-case basis, depending on who's living in the units and how they're designed.
Got it. The reason I'm asking that is so we last night we had St. Mary's presenting for their new stadium that we approved the plan, and they mentioned their master plan, which I frankly hadn't ever looked at before, and I had a chance to look at it a little bit today, and I do know that they had planned, I don't know where they are in it, to build residential complexes in their master plan through 2030. I'm wondering what level of interaction you've had with St. Mary's in terms. I saw that you were looking at parcels all over. I'm just wondering whether or not the university was at all engaged as part of housing opportunity spots.
So I can take that question. Staff has done some early outreach to St. Mary's, and actually they do have a representative here tonight who may want to comment during public comment period. But they are aware, and they have shown some interest in looking at the off-campus site, which is part of the Reams Center.
Interesting. The other question I had regarding St. Mary's is, with 3,000 students, the requirement for first years to live on campus, that means that you have 3 other years where folks may be looking for a place to live. And I'm wondering whether or not we've engaged the university at all in polling they may have done for their student body on how to make Moraga a more attractive place for them to live that might actually decrease some of the traffic impacts of folks commuting into Moraga from other places. And it did sound like when we talked about this previously, that we at least had some kind of vision of trying to make Moraga more of a university town feel in some of these. I'm just wondering how we've worked in collecting data from the university and really getting an idea of where the student body wants to live and how we can convince them to stay here.
I can take that because for the past 4 years, I've had conversations with numerous individuals from St. Mary's leadership who have all indicated that they want to have more housing in Moraga. And in addition to the housing, they want to have more places where St. Mary's residents or St. Mary's students gather. So as you all likely know, when you go to Lafayette, you go there to the, Noah's and Chipotle, and all the St. Mary's students are there. And so, they're really looking for both the small business opportunities as well as the housing opportunities for their students. And while they've indicated, that they might have the interest to develop some of those on their office site, I think that their preference or their need is for the free market to develop these sites, because there's lots of students who need housing. And you're right, they commute in and out of Moraga, and that traffic is on Moraga Road.
And if I may add, we are working with St. Mary's to do an outreach to their students and faculty regarding the housing element and getting them to take the survey. So we do have a contact there. And also I do want to mention that we do have a representative from St. Mary's who would like to comment when it's appropriate.
And
We can take that during public comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, it would seem so, when I went to graduate school in Baltimore, Charles Village was not at all someplace that anyone wanted to hang out. It is now a place where I think that people enjoy a walkable area, being able to live and go to classes and have fun in close proximity to the university. And it just seems that the MCSP might be an opportunity for them to do that as well, as we've talked about in the past. And I just think that really engaging with the student body and finding out the types of things that students that would make developments in that area attractive for students might be a way to really, given that we do have to increase density, there is worries about traffic. And we are trying to make Moraga an attractive place for all of us to live in. That just seems like something that is, it really should be integral into a lot of the planning, especially if we're looking at doing a good deal of the development at this end of town. And so that was another question that I asked. Is the primary reason for looking at the MCSP zone as the primary opportunity area is probably because it's more land, and also because we already have a specific plan available for that, where we do not have that same tool in place for Ream Center?
Yeah, I mean, it's a larger area geographically, so there are more opportunity sites just by virtue of the size of the area and its scale. It's also, they've designated a priority development area at the regional level. So, but I think one of the policy questions is, what should that balance be? It doesn't have to be 25-75. If you feel it's more appropriate to lean more on the Ream Center, you can certainly do that. It's one of the questions that we're, grappling with in thinking through this.
And another question I had, again, just in the, a lot of the concerns that I've heard are people very much worried about the impact that parking or that additional vehicles on the road is going to add to folks' commute. I know, again, getting to trying to get to work previously when I worked in Walnut Creek was a challenge, especially if it was close to when school starts or getting home close to when school gets out. So it is another idea, given that many of us have been working at home for the last 2 years.
Carrie, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you have a question?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
The question is, another potential avenue, I'm just wondering if we could explore towards our RENA Total, our live workspaces, another way to keep cars off the road and have folks actually being able to This is something that exists in San Francisco, and I'm not sure if this would be a good opportunity for Moraga, but would be another way to reduce the number of vehicles on the road.
Yeah, and the answer is yes, we can certainly explore live workspace through the zoning regulations.
Great, those are my questions.
Thank you. Okay, Teresa, and then I think Marcus.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. And originally Brenda asked my questions. She was so fast. Good for you, Brenda. But in listening to this, I have a question for you, Barry. What would be the defining tool that we could use for St. Mary's? You know, I hear that we have to do certain things to have that housing for it to count. So what would that look like?
Well, what the state says is that the housing has to be available to folks other than just the students at St. Mary's. So, and that would include faculty, and it could include staff at the college. It doesn't mean it can be open to anybody. But if it's students plus families, then it can count. What they're basically saying is that dorm style apartments or apartment style dorms, I guess I'm not sure which you'd call it, really don't count, because the only people that are living there are students, even if they're in apartments. And this is something, you know, I would call it a gray area, because the state is a little inconsistent in how they've treated different communities. And I will tell you, I was on a call with 6 or 7 communities that have colleges and universities that all were telling different stories about how the state had treated, you know, this type of housing. So it's, yeah.
So what I'm hearing is it's unclear, but what you have to have are students, and it could be faculty, and then that would be okay.
Yeah, as long as the units are not limited only to students and not anybody else.
Okay, so housing could be for students and faculty. Okay, well,
Right.
That's great to know. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Mhm.
Thank you. Marcus.
Yes. I have 2 questions, Barry, and I do want to start by saying that was a wonderful presentation, outstanding, very, very informative. Question number 1, the fact that we've received about approximately 550 responses with the survey, when do we see the analysis or the feedback or the results of that, right? In helping us, you know, make our evaluations and helping us make our own assessments. That's question number 1. Question number 2 pertains to zoning, the Moraga Center, zoning Reams Center. If those parcels get rezoned, does that provide for the opportunity for owners to rebuild? Meaning, does it provide for the opportunity for them to tear down what's currently there and then perhaps rebuild mixed use or other, you know, like other types of retail with perhaps residential and commercial?
Sure. Yeah, I can answer both of those. So the first question is, we've provided a March 15th deadline for the survey. So as of March 15th, the survey will come down, and then we'll do a final analysis of all of the results. And I expect that within 2 weeks of that, so by the end of the month, we'll have a survey report to the commission and council, which highlights all of the findings and tells you what we heard and gives you a chance to see some of the comments that were received. On the question of the mixed use, the short answer is yes. It would give property owners the opportunity to rebuild what's on their properties now. The next part of this task is to write the development standards and the design standards that would go into new zoning regulations for those areas. So we would need to define what it is they would be building back if they were taking something out, and make sure that it's a product and has, you know, appeal and is something that the town wants. So that's really the next step in this process, is to prepare those development standards and zoning regulations.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Carl, then Steve.
Madam Mayor. Barry, I've got a couple of questions. In general, it seems like we have 4 and now 5 categories of housing we're looking for. The state's looking for above moderate, very low, and they've got 4 anyway. They've got 4 at the state level. We also have the seniors, which in the planning document that we've received and in your presentation sort of get treated as if they are maybe very low or low. And we've got students, which I can assume are very low or low. Would it be at all helpful to quantify the seniors a little better? 3 planning directors in a row during my tenure have been really clear that Moraga needs more housing for our senior population. This is both out of kindness, I'm sure, and also out of a desire to see some of those households turn over, those properties turn over and become of more value to the town. Predominantly, I make the assumption that most of those people who've been in their homes since the 60s have a significant stake in those properties. Whether they have 0 mortgage left or not is maybe not really moot. The point is they don't pay that much. And so that creates a really odd dynamic in your analysis. If we have more senior housing and we move a senior who is self-sufficient, that is probably very little income, but no financial concerns, into that very low cost housing, does it still satisfy RHNA?
Yes. So just to, that's a great point. And one of the dilemmas of this data is that it doesn't really account for the value, the wealth that someone may have in the house that they live in, because they don't have much of an income, but they're sitting on $2 million essentially with a house. So the point is well taken. I think the detailed analysis that's behind the bullet points that were in the staff report covers a lot of the points that you made. But your question is, yes, we would be able to count those units as very low income housing or as low income housing. They're typically built by nonprofits, and they're for income qualifying seniors. I would have to ask the nonprofit, some of the nonprofits, how they handle the accumulated wealth that a senior might have from the sale of their house and who is eligible for that. I know the population we identified as being in the greatest need, well, very low income senior homeowners and senior renters both have high needs.
Okay, and I recognize that somebody may be classified as house rich and income poor. I hope that still would allow them to be eligible for some of this housing we're planning on building or planning on permitting, because that's been the focus of the town's planning directors for some time. It also seems to be the greatest and easiest way to free up housing inventory in our community would be to build some attractive housing for seniors to shift. We've talked about it for a long time. It hasn't happened yet. The home value. In your briefing and in the staff packet, we use a date of February 2012 as our benchmark. And we talk about the huge 125% increase. 2012 was still during the recession. A much more valuable metric would be to use an inflation adjusted 2006 date, because that actually would have some meaning. Using a recession number against an inflated number that we have today in our hypermarket is not valid in any statistical sense. So I mentioned that as a criticism and would ask that we might look at a different year that might be more representative of the value increase. Covered that one. Area 14. Area 14 has for several months at least been presented as senior housing, going to be another senior home of some sort adjacent the other two. I understand that it is now being looked at as about 150 apartments for everybody who could be eligible to move into them. I know this is not the format for asking, but I would like to know if it's been considered the impact of having 150 families living adjacent to residential senior facilities. I see that as a problem from the get-go. I see that as a poor step forward. And I see that as an unfortunate shift away from, oh yeah, the senior housing we have said for years we want to build. Why would we do this?
Carl, are you asking a question or?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so your question is, has that been considered?
Why would we shift the Area 14 housing away from seniors to a general population?
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll answer it and just say it's the property owners up to their discretion to determine the type of development that they want to build.
I thought we permitted the type of development that could be built.
We determine the zoning for the development, and that parcel is R20, which means they can build 20 units per acre of multifamily housing or residential units. And if they build senior housing, then that density is increased to 30 units. And if either of those developments are affordable, then they can take advantage of the 20% density bonus provided by the state. But it's up to the discretion of the property owner to determine what type of development they actually want to invest in.
Okay.
Carl, do you have any other questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, Manager Battenberg. That was a good answer, and I appreciate it. I would hope that the town could shape that decision better. So I did ask earlier what category senior housing falls into, and I think I understand that it's the two lower incomes. If there were a way for that to reflect on our table, it might help communicate the direction. If both student housing and senior housing were on our table as a category, it might help people shape their responses to our survey.
I believe that neither senior market rate or student housing are kind of recognized as a specialized area for zoning. So a senior affordable is, and then a senior development is because they can, the developer can determine, certain criteria for allowing residents to own or rent there, but that's not necessarily a zoning decision. Do you want to clarify that further, Barry?
Well, just to say the housing element, I mean, there's two issues here. One is, sort of the town's policy and what the town wants to say. The other is what the state is requiring us to do in the housing element. So typically what we do in the housing element is we identify seniors as a special needs group, regardless of their income. And we look at what are the unique needs of older adults in the community, declining mobility, and the need for an in-care health provider, and the need for assistance. that's kind of irrespective of income. But we are looking at what type of housing do we need to serve all of those needs across all income spectrums. And, you know, there's an emphasis on the lower incomes because that's where it's hardest to close the gap and meet the need. So that's kind of where the housing element goes. What you're doing on the town side, if you want to put in more policies on things that deal with specific types of senior housing, that's kind of your prerogative, but it's separate. It's separate from what the state is asking us to do here.
Yeah, and I do want to say that this is an important discussion that's been raised by Commissioner Davis, is affordable housing. And this is something that we definitely want to come back. Again, we've had one study session on this topic, but we want to come back again in the future and have a more in-depth discussion on how we can implement some of these really important tools that some communities are already doing in order to achieve those RHNA income categories.
Thank you. All right, other questions of Barry and of staff? How about Steve is next, then Graham, then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. And Barry, again, excellent presentation. You guys are handling a very complex project very well. Three questions related from the presentation. They should be fairly short. I think I heard that town's role here is to provide zoned areas to meet the RHNA 6 cycle requirements for the different categories. Yet I also know that for the 6th cycle of RHNA, that HCD, the Housing Community Development Department, are going to monitor actual follow through, and that if those building doesn't happen, that there are going to be repercussions, reactions to that. Has that been relaxed? Because I mean, we have to, my understanding is whatever we zone has to be in fact practical for execution. And that may be the real challenge here, huh?
I think, well, what you just said, the last statement about whatever we zone is practical for execution, that's the key point. We can't really control whether the development happens or not if the market doesn't support it. What we can control is, have we put the zoning in place that's realistic and that supports the type of development that we say we're looking for. And that's really what we have to do here. And that's the test we have to meet. And that's what the state is evaluating. If the housing element cycle, if we're 3 or 4 years in and we haven't produced a single unit, I think where the state would be looking at us and saying what's going on in Moraga is if units were being produced in Lafayette and Orinda and Danville and all of our surrounding communities, but nothing was happening in Moraga, they would say, hey, what's going on there? There must be, you know, what are you doing wrong that those other communities are doing? That's where I think we get into the monitoring and the consequences, so to speak. But if we are, you know, at least at this point, what we're doing is providing the development envelope, basically, and then, you know, yeah,
I agree. And so that's a good clarification. Of those 800 units that we're trying to identify spots for, my understanding is, and I think that was shown here, you know, it's the very low income and moderate. Are those, you know, this is more a nomenclature issue. Are those what we would call affordable housing? And is there a correlation to that? Because I think I heard that 800 referred to as low income, and I know it's all 3 categories, and so I'd like to get some consistency here.
Yeah, there is a difference, and others on staff and the attorney may want to chime in on this as well. We're not when we're talking about housing that is serving those, it's usually affordable housing. But it can be affordable by design. If there are, for example, junior accessory dwelling units, those technically are serving, low and very low income people, but they're not restricted. They're not income and rent restricted. It's the market meeting that need. So usually when we talk about affordable housing, it's housing where there's a deed restriction, where there's some,
okay.
Yeah, something that is a financing source, or the income is limited of the occupant, or, something more like that.
So we just need to keep in mind that those 800 units actually cover the very low, low and moderate income
Right. And,
categories.
and some of those will be market rate units.
Very good. The last thing, again, there was a slide that showed the very low income units have to be at least 0.5 acres and not more than 10 acres for a development. Yet we've got ADUs, which for that distribution can be considered very low income. Do we worry about that the ADUs are going to be less than a half acre?
That's not a consideration for the state.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they don't apply that that criteria for ADUs.
I'm being too detailed here. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. All right, Graham, then Mike, then Sona.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. So just to recap and then ask a question. So we've got a 20-year-old plan. We've got RHNA goals of around 1,000 units, clear housing needs for low income across student, senior workforce, and low income. We've got great suggestions for changes to zoning, especially in the commercial districts. We have identified locations across the town where this housing could possibly happen. Director Hamid has a survey out to 300 property owners with only a 10% response to date. And we've got 3 units that were constructed in 2021. So I guess my question is, what more can we do to encourage development, given that we've got all these breadcrumbs, but what we need really is buildings. So I'd say anything further we can do to encourage or entice either nonprofit or further partnerships with St. Mary's, private development, and/or is there any property owned by the town that's available to be developed for housing as well too?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We may have more than one of us who would like to answer. I just want to respond to one aspect of your question, which is when you think about what's causing the housing to not be built. The next step in this process for us is to take a hard look at the zoning regulations and see if there are aspects of your development standards that make it difficult for a property owner to build something. And that's next up on our in terms of the tasks in the housing element. So we'll be coming back to you with a report on, we call them constraints to regulatory constraints to development. And part of that is getting input from developers and getting input from the folks who build and saying, is there something in Moraga's zoning code that makes it difficult? And what is that? And how can we mitigate that? So that's the regulatory part. I think there were other aspects of your question.
Yeah, I'll answer the question in regards to, does the town own any property? We own Commons Park, the hacienda, the town offices, the chambers, and a lot of little roadway medians, but we don't really own any potential sites for development. And the town is a relatively new city, and so we don't really have significant land ownership or funding. We don't have a redevelopment agency, which was really an economic engine for a lot of cities to fund affordable housing. So those tools aren't unfortunately available to us. The town actually just struggles with meeting its infrastructure needs, which it's doing a better job than it's done in the past, but there still are outstanding, needs just to take care of our storm drains, our streets, our facilities.
Gotcha.
So I would like to just expand a little bit. You can also go online and take a look at our current housing element, the fifth cycle housing element. And in there, it does talk about some of the government constraints and barriers specific to Moraga. And there are action plans in there as well. So some of them have been identified, and I think we are, our consultant team and staff are evaluating those, and some may carry over.
Gotcha. Through the mayor, may I ask a follow-up of Director Hamid?
Yes, of course.
When you do have the survey response from the 300 plus property owners, are you looking to produce a summary of your findings?
So I just want to clarify something. The survey is townwide. And the survey is going, I encourage everybody here that's on, attending tonight's meeting to please go online to makemoraga.home.org to take that survey. With the property owners, I did send a specific letter out to the property owners regarding rezoning opportunities. And that's what the specific outreach was.
Gotcha.
And I also discussed, I requested that they attend the meeting. I made them aware. I've spoken to several property owners and I do see some of them are in attendance tonight. So that's what that outreach was in regards to. It was not specifically about the survey.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying.
All right, any more questions, Graham?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And then Sona.
Okay. Yeah, well, first, thank you, Barry. Great presentation. I can tell from you and staff, a lot of work went into this. So starting with a thank you. Some basic questions before we can get to the actual issue here. I'm looking at table 1, the development pipeline, and I found this very helpful as you're listing out the developments there, but there are some developments that aren't there. And I'm not sure I understand why the Indian Valley, the rest of MCSP, ADU assumptions around them, et cetera. And going forward, could we list all the items? Because just showing some and not showing other just doesn't feel good. So could you help me with that?
Yeah, and others may, again, staff may want to chime in on this too. We included projects where there's an active application, where there's activity right now, or where there's been an entitlement already granted. So if there's a concept plan or something that's, that's on hold, that's not active, it's going to be in the housing element, but it won't be listed as an active project that we're subtracting. There's a whole separate aspect of this, which is a list of opportunity sites. And so sites that have the potential for future housing where there's not some active application before the town would show up there as opposed to in that table. That's really the active projects that either have been approved or there's an active application where we expect that there'll be housing built between 2023 and 2031. So that's what you're seeing on that list.
Okay, because I see a reference here defined as pre-application or concept stages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway, okay, it was a question from someone. Another question from a resident was about SB 9. I don't know if we covered this in a previous meeting. So I take a lot, I can split my lot, 2 duplexes, add ADUs, I now have 6 units. Does that count in this process?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't quantified the potential number of units that could be generated through SB 9. It's a really hard number to come up with. There are some data out there that says we can expect about a 1.5% or 2% of whatever your current total number of housing units are. In general, those are not going to be affordable units. And so, what the state is looking for us to do is show where we can build housing at 20 units per acre or more. Okay. That's kind of our test. They aren't going to really count if we say, oh, we think we can get, 40 more units through SB 9, because chances are those are not going to be, they're not going to be lower and very low income units. So that's the reason we haven't tried to measure the number of potential SB 9 units. And frankly, in their housing, no one is really doing that in their housing elements.
Yeah, but I mean, they could have 2 ADUs when they do the split, right?
It's true, yeah. I mean, there's some potential out there.
Okay, next item I have on basics. So the buffer, I just want to be really clear here. Is the state mandating a requirement of a 20% buffer to total RHNA units?
They're not mandating 20%. They're mandating somewhere between a range of what they're recommending 15 to 30% be the buffer. And that's in writing. It's guidance from HCD. We want to see a buffer of 15 to 30% on top of your RHNA.
And isn't it true that the state has rejected the housing elements from some of the Southern California cities for not including that buffer?
Or
so
for
when
not
they say it's
enough.
a recommendation, it's a requirement.
Right.
Okay. So the buffer is a requirement, the percentage could have some judgment.
That's correct. It is in the town's interest to have a larger buffer because it gives you the flexibility to use some of those sites for something other than low-income housing in the future.
Right. So another question in this front. So I'm trying to think of have we just therefore perhaps increased what our RENA number is? So we start with a RENA number of 1118. Then if we say we're going to add a buffer of 244, then have we effectively said, well, actually our RENA number now is 1,362?
You have, and so has every other community in the Bay Area. I mean, this is something that everyone is doing to different degrees. Basically, you have to go up at least 15% above that number. And in some cases, communities are doing 40 or 50%.
Right. Okay. I wanted to reference page 9 on the staff report here, and I'll just read the sentence. And this is another question I've gotten. The owner of each site may develop the site in any manner that is consistent with the underlying zoning. So, for example, we may sit here and zone it low or very low, but the owner does not have a requirement to build that. The owner, if it's zoned to be built is moderate or above moderate, let's say market dictates that, they still have that opportunity.
Yes, and just to clarify, you wouldn't actually be zoning it low or very low. You would be identifying it as an opportunity site in your housing element for low or very low. The zoning is not going to dictate not going to specify the affordability level.
Right. So a property owner has a project that's been approved, and there's no requirement that that property owner needs to build low or very low units.
Correct.
Right, not at this time, but we will be coming back at a future meeting to discuss inclusionary housing and having a requirement, or if there should be a requirement for a percentage of new housing to be affordable.
I do want to point out that there are a lot of towns, many towns that are already doing it. Danville, Lafayette are already implementing an inclusionary housing ordinance.
Right. Now, I thought, because we had that discussion on tools. So, and I thought inclusionary was for on new applications, but if you have a development that was previously approved, that wouldn't apply. Did I misunderstand?
No, that's correct. If it's already been approved, then it wouldn't apply. But the other thing that applies here is that there's affordable, and then there's just affordable by design. So the smaller the unit is, the more affordable it is. So the greater the density, the greater likelihood that the unit will be affordable. And so that's part of what's behind some of the desire to zone for higher density.
Okay, and Barry, your slide on ground rules is very good. And you had a reference, there needed to be landowner interest as a ground rule. So I'm wondering, even though we're at preliminary conversations, do we have preliminary comments from landowners that they're in maybe general agreement with what they're seeing here in this proposal, or they're not, or I'm going to build it market and whatever it is? Do we have any feedback there?
So I can start, Barry, if you'd like.
Sure.
So I've spoken to several property owners within the Ream Center. And generally I've gotten some positive feedback on the rezoning effort. And, you know, then I've just got, I've also heard from one particular owner who didn't feel one way or another. And we've also reached out to the property owner at the Ream Center itself. And there is interest there as well. And we also spoke about St. Mary's. There is interest there as well. There are initial indications for a positive conversation on this topic about rezoning and allowing for higher density. And
yeah, I just wanted to add that, like, probably a year and a half ago, we talked to the primary owner at the Ream Center, and we said, this project is coming up and we are going to very likely rezone your shopping center, and we're going to do the best job that we can. but it's your property, you know what will work, and it would be in your best interest to determine what the opportunity is for you. And they have engaged an architect and they are working on some plans. And that's really important to us because we can use that information and the information about, you know, how many parking spaces per unit. Because one of the things that we'll be talking about as we get into the weeds is right now every housing unit in Moraga requires 2+ parking spaces. Well, if you have a 1-bedroom apartment, you don't need 2 parking spaces. So we're asking them questions like that. We're asking questions about the FAR, about how many units per acre, about how much height you need for the project to pencil out. So I feel like that they're going to provide us some interesting information. We've certainly encouraged other property owners of large sites to do the same, so that if there's anything that needs to be addressed in the zoning, we can do it now and they don't have to come back and ask for a general plan update because, you know, something's a little off.
Okay, and my last question is looking at the option at the Ream Center. I think there had been hopes of, well, if we put a second and third floor on top of the Ream Center, then we should have a lot of units. And it doesn't, from the units I'm looking at, it doesn't look like that. So what is the assumption behind the units at the Ream Center? I believe that would be the 160.
The 160 was the number for the community commercial zoning district, which includes the shopping center, plus the out parcels in the shopping center, plus the land on the north side of Ream Boulevard that's zoned commercial, which is the 24-hour fitness and so forth of St. Mary's. So it's quite a large area. And I think what we've said is that 160 is a low, it's relatively low compared to what the actual potential is. Because we are not assuming a build out type number at this point. We're looking at at the same time, we're looking at what our arena is. And when we do an environmental impact report for this project, we're not going to assume that every single unit that could possibly be built is included in that. So it's an estimate based on a number of, looking at the sites, looking at where the greatest opportunities are, looking at what the land, the building values are, looking at what spaces are leased or empty, and what the property owners are interested in. So it's kind of a combination of all of those things, but you're correct that it is a lower number than could potentially be achieved there.
It's actually relatively complicated. You can't just add a second and third story to a current building. There's a process that you need to go through where you need to consolidate all your businesses, the ones that are active and productive. You need to accommodate them and move them, free up an area where you can build a new structure. And so that is limiting, and that means that it happens in phases. And it also means that some of your most productive, successful businesses, they're not going to want to relocate, or they have really large footprints that you can't just relocate them to another storefront. So it's a little bit complicated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Sona.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand, because it sounds like the combination of tools can lead to some of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. So, for example, what I'm gathering is well, if we take the floor area ratio approach versus a density approach, because that gives us more units per total project, and then we also require that some of these are allocated to affordable or low income through an inclusionary ordinance or some other tool, then we can incentivize to bring and develop. But what I'm hearing is well, we're not there yet. So we're not talking about inclusionary, but we are talking about floor area ratio. So can you kind of help me understand that making a decision on just one piece may be missing the bigger opportunity, the bigger picture, because in combination, these things can lead to a bigger outcome?
Yes, that's a really good point, council member, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think you can provide the higher level direction without making a final decision on whether we use floor area ratio or density tonight. I mean, it would be good to know if there's kind of a gut feeling one way or the other. But the main thing that we're looking for is are the areas that we're putting before you ideal or preferred locations for these multifamily housing opportunities that we need to create? Is there a compelling reason to have housing in one area and not the other, or to allow housing in places where it's not allowed under the existing zoning, or to focus on one area versus the other? I think that's really more where we're at today. The decisions, I mean, it would be good to get some direction on the the FAR versus density, I think, but I also understand that, there may not be enough information out there. And when we come back to you with our housing opportunity sites, we may be looking at two different ways to present those to you. And one is, here's the way it's going to look if we use FAR, and here's the way it's going to look if we use density, but at least we'll know where we're focusing our efforts to identify those sites. The inclusionary question is a little bit separate again. It's really more of an implementation tool. Once we have our zoning in place, I think we can start to look at what is it going to mean if we say 15% of all of the new units need to be affordable to low and very low. What is that? Because to me, that's like in a way, it's a follow-up conversation that would happen further down.
That makes sense. Okay, I think I'm jumping into the weeds, but thank you for framing the decision.
Sure.
Thank you. Teresa, did you have another question?
I didn't until just a moment ago when I heard Barry. So, and it's not a question, so maybe I shouldn't go there.
That would be great. Maybe you can wait till comment time. Thank you. Anybody else have questions? I have one or a couple, actually. Barry, I just want to make sure I'm sort of understanding the math here. So we start with the RHNA allocation, right? And then we subtract what is in the development pipeline. And I know Mike asked the question about the numbers in the development pipeline, but as I understand it, it's basically a likely to be developed standard. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so it is in a sense a judgment call.
Yes, there was a slide where we showed the remaining above moderate income number, and we crossed that line out, and we said we have enough land to meet that need. Those sites that are not specifically listed in that table that are out there as proposals or that may come in the next few years are included in that number, and that's the reason that 128 remainder was struck out, because we know that there are enough potential projects out there on single family low density zone sites to eliminate any remaining need at the above moderate level.
Okay, but we're comfortable that our bottom line on development pipeline is defensible.
Yes.
Okay. So we subtract that and then we add the buffer, right? And that too has to be defensible. Is that right? Based on facts and circumstances here.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And then you looked at 100 potential sites. Is that right? And you narrowed it down to 22 because basically in accordance with the general plan, and I'm pretty sure with clear council direction, you focused in to the commercial centers and away from the outlying areas and from our open space. Is that right?
That is, yes.
Okay, all right. So then we go to the kind of how do we get to the magic number? And my question is, I want to make sure I understand table 4 on page 19 of the staff report. So that's the summary of preliminary realistic capacity limits by zoning district. So if I understood what Cynthia said earlier and what you said earlier, the figures here, like the 1,132 is not the maximum, but that is a reasonable amount taking into account the acreage, but also site-specific considerations and other factors that would bring if I just did the acreage times 24, I would come up with a much higher number than this is. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah, think about the 8-year horizon. What's reasonable in the next 8 years?
right. All right. Okay. Fair enough. That was it for, let me just make sure. That was it for my questions. Any other council member or commissioner questions? Okay, would folks appreciate a 5-minute break before we take public comment? Do I see nodding of heads? I see thumbs up and
Sure.
okay. Let's reconvene at 8 o'clock. Thank you. And if everyone would kindly turn off their mics and their video. Okay. Thank you, Marty. We're back on the record. We are on agenda item 3A, the Comprehensive Advanced Planning Initiative, and I will now open public comment. I invite the public to comment on this agenda item. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes a person, and please use the raise hand feature on Zoom to let us know that you'd like to speak. And the first person is Sarah Sparron. Sarah, come on in.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. This is 2 nights in a row that I've gotten to spend with most of you. I am speaking on behalf of St. Mary's College. I am the Vice President of Facilities at the college and really interested in all of the conversation tonight. One, because housing is a big issue for us, not only for students, but also faculty and staff. I was on the meeting a couple of months ago, I believe, when this all was first starting to kick off. And do know that in addition to our students being counted as low income, many of our staff and some of our faculty are also falling into that category, which makes it very difficult for them to live in the town of Moraga. We know that it would be advantageous to us and to the community to have those folks who are working in Moraga to be able to live here as well. So we have been working with Afshan to talk about what kind of opportunities we could look at our Ream Center property in particular. We do, I know that I think Carrie mentioned earlier that he looked at our master plan. We definitely have a growing need for housing. And in our master plan, it specifically talks about on-campus housing. However, we know that there is a unique opportunity at the Ream Center because we would have the option for potentially graduate, student, and family housing and faculty and staff housing in addition to our student housing in that area. We are looking at moving to requiring students to live on campus for the first 2 years, which would mean that we would ultimately not have any housing left for our juniors and seniors. And we know that at this point in time, when they can't find housing in the few places in Moraga, they then go out to Walnut Creek and go further away, where they're bringing all of and spending all of their time away from our campus. And then we also know that our faculty and staff are living even further away and commuting in. So another advantage to having us close is on the traffic impact. And I know that I spoke with Teresa earlier too about opportunities for the bus system to run our students back and forth, which would further alleviate some of that traffic that we all get caught in over by Camp Lindo. So we just think that there's a great opportunity. We are in the conceptual phase right now, but we would be very supportive of the Ream area being rezoned into a mixed use multifamily. We think that there's a lot of opportunities for us in the town of Moraga.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the collaboration. We look forward to continuing to work with the college.
Yes, I do too. Thank you.
All right, next, Ashley Coates. Welcome, Ashley.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Good, okay. I've lived in Moraga 30 years, love it here, and it's sad that our kids have moved out of state because they can't afford to live in California. I all have co-founded just the beginning of this year a group called Inclusive Moraga, and we're dedicated to meeting the needs of the community by encouraging high quality multifamily developments in the core areas. So we definitely support almost all of your rezoning recommendations, up to 24 units per acre, for instance. But don't understand FAR enough to know whether it would make sense to go to FAR. What I'm worried about is if we don't have a minimum of some kind, how can we be sure that we get at least the minimum developed on a piece of land? The other point I was wondering about is I still think we could have trouble developing enough units for low and very low income if we don't have any higher zoning than 24 units per acre. So I was curious if there'd be a possibility of zoning just a few areas, even higher density. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. All right, any other public comment? I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, there we go. Dave Brazzoni, come on in, Dave.
Good evening. First of all, I want to thank, can you hear me?
We sure can, Dave.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. First of all, I want to thank Afshaw and Barry for the meeting earlier this year. Earliest this week. And also, I did discuss some of these issues with the town council. I want to refer to the staff report, page 9, that, starting on lines, 27 and going to 35. So these are, this is an important question that I have. It is important to point out the designation of a parcel as a housing opportunity site does not preclude its development with above moderate income housing. But I'm a little more concerned when we get, down, to the, however, if the proposed use is something other than a low or moderate income housing, the town must make a determination that it has sufficient capacity on that opportunity sites to meet its RHNA requirement. If the town cannot make this determination, another site needs to be identified. So I'm concerned that, there might be a conflict and someone says, nope, you can't do that. And no, we can't find another site. But I'm also concerned about the the above moderate and moderate. I'm sure this condition applies to the other categories also. So, I'm worried about this, and I'm also worried that, the underlying zoning, if that's going to be changed. And Barry did talk about existing zoning and evaluating the existing constraints. We went through a lot of these discussions earlier, the last 2 years when the specific plan was going through its implementation. And I and some of my consultants spent a lot of time with staff, and a lot of our suggestions were ignored. So I believe there is, there are constraints, and I'm worried about, and the rezoning process will be going through the same steps that we did previously. So I'm hoping that that would not be the case, but I have not seen anything to indicate that we would change our ways on this. So, for example, a lot of the in our R20 areas, I have been pointing out to staff that we can't achieve the 20 DUA under a bunch of the existing rules. So now we're talking about raising it to 24. So are we actually discussing realistic numbers? I don't know if we are or not, but I know Barry and the consultants and staff, they have the planning background to remediate those problems if they're there. I'm just not sure if there's going to be a political will to be doing that. The bottom line is the 800 units that we're concentrating on, I am not clear if those include moderate. I believe those 800 units are specifically talking about very low and low income. I don't believe it includes moderate. So those are my comments. I'm looking forward to additional interaction with staff. This was an informative meeting. I did get a lot of new additional meeting that helped answer some of the questions that I had after reading the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Kendall.
There we go. Hello. I heard some interesting comments tonight too, and I agree with Dave. There's some very interesting, good things. Barry, thank you for a very good presentation, but irregardless is not an actual word. Carrie Hillis made a comment that we should be looking into work, live space. That's ridiculous. We live here in a bedroom community. Many here are currently involved in organizations that have actively reduced growth through growth ordinances recently and as far back as 20 years. So Graham, thank you for your comment, because yes, this does go back 20 years. When will this town recognize that the outrageous effort, which was endorsed and exasperated by the town manager with development restrictions that she put in place after state code was set with SB 330 and other regulations that preceded SB 330. So the height, setback, and density restrictions that the town manager set defied law. And I do believe we need to have a town hearing, a public hearing on this. Senior and student housing, or this is a non-entity like was mentioned. This is a housing element, though, that is clearly driven by town interests, because the town council decides what group they want to especially help. Oh, you want to help the seniors. Oh, we want to help the students. That's not a group. And Barry, irrespective is not a word. I have a question for everybody here. Has the state enforcement task force or any other state representative involved with anything having to do with SB 330 or any housing element been in touch with anybody at the town? I'd like to know. I've asked this question, it hasn't been answered. Graham, thank you again for bringing up the question about the 20-year plan. The town planning commission is lost in the woods. They don't realize that this problem is 20 years old. It happened because there's people who resisted growth. And so that's why we have empty retail space. I am a commercial business owner. I own 920 Country Club Drive. I want to build a 10-story building there and put residential there. And I just agree totally with what Ashley said, which is we need to question whether 24 units per acre is proper, because I think it needs to be twice or 3 times that. So thank you for your time. I think we do really need to listen to Barry. Barry's presentation was spot on. And so you have to listen to Barry because he's a consultant. He doesn't have anything in here except that he's paid, but he was bringing up exceptional points because the law, the SB 330, SB 9, SB 10, and about the 18 other laws that go with it are telling us what's going on. And it's because the people who resisted growth in Moraga for 20 years that we have just a very short time to come up with answers, whereas other towns around us in California have 3 years because they're not an affected town. We are an affected town. And Barry,
Kendall, you're over time. Can you wrap up, please?
if you can please go over that point very carefully with everybody here, that we are an affected town. We are being damaged because of decisions we made previously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to note that if anyone has an issue with the town ordinances on development, the responsibility rests with the council for those, not with the town manager. Next, Dave Schneier. Dave, come on in.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. I just wanted to approach the evening and say thank you, Barry. Very thorough presentation. I think it was very informative. I take issue with a couple of the things, primarily with notice. I know that the statement was made by several folks about getting notice out to the community. The surveys that were received back apparently only came from a portion of the community. I think that based on historical notice on various issues, the Ream Theater historical designation being one of them, there was a huge push by the council at that time to put up billboards at Ream Boulevard and Moraga Road, Moraga Way and Moraga Road. Use the reader board that was across from the Commons. Why is this issue the biggest issue in the history of Moraga, probably, not being advertised through the churches, through the schools, and using as many media sources as we can? It perplexes me. And my hope is that we can engage the entire community, not just a portion of it. One of the other issues that came up this evening in a statement that was made by one of the town staff indicated that the town doesn't own any other land. I'm going to read to you one sentence off of the Moraga Country Club disclosure for members. That says, land underlying the last 10 holes of the golf course is subject to 2 ground leases, the major one being with the town of Moraga. Is that not land owned by the town? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Any other public comment? I see no other raised hands. Okay, I will therefore close public comment and bring it back to the commission and to the council. Again, now is the time for each of us to provide any input, thoughts, comments to staff and to our consultant on the presentation we had tonight. And so why don't we, why don't we kick it off with the chair of the Planning Commission?
Excuse me, Mayor, if I can interrupt.
Yes, of course, Steve.
Thank you. There were, I noted at least 3 questions asked by public. Do we want to try to answer those questions before we move on?
What were they, Steve?
Ashley asked, do we need higher than 24 DUA? And I don't know if Barry would want to address whether that's been, I know we've got 30 out there. Is that the upper limit that we're considering? That's one. And then the second one is Dave Brizzoni saying that that is the 800 just very low and low, or is the 800 very low, low and moderate? And then finally, Dave Chenair asked about ownership of the last 10 holes of the golf course. Those are the 3 questions that I captured.
Barry, you want to take a whack at the first 2 and Cynthia to take the third?
Sure. Yes. So you can certainly consider densities higher than 24. That's the number that we had recommended because it's relatively modest compared to what you have now, 20. And I think we're kind of reacting to, let's go up in increments. I do want to also point out that 24 units per acre does not include the density bonuses that could be eligible, that could be given to folks who are building on these sites. So if you do start requiring affordable units or other types of units that are restricted, you'll be also in a position where you're offering density bonuses on top of that. So you may be looking at 30 units per acre with those bonuses, or 35 even in some cases. So that's something to keep in mind. But certainly, yeah, 24 is somewhat low for communities in the Bay Area. So what was the second?
What's contained in the 800?
Oh, yeah. So that's thank you, Dave, for asking that question. That we did include the moderate in there, and the reason we included the moderate is that really you're not getting above moderate income housing you're not getting moderate income housing in traditional new rental housing anymore in Moraga. If you look at the brand new housing that's being built in Lafayette and the rents that are being charged, or in Walnut Creek, those units are more on the above moderate income range than moderate in terms of what the market rate rents are. So we're counting our moderate income numbers. There was only 72 that were remaining that we needed to to provide after we subtracted the pipeline projects. So we added those into the low and very low. So it's all three.
In regards to the town ownership of additional sites, we own Mulholland Ridge, which is a couple hundred acres that was acquired as open space in exchange for development of some of the parcels along the exterior or of that open space. We also own some of the acreage that the Country Club leases from the town for the, I think I call it the back nine. That is, I believe, also owned recreation open space. I have not heard any conversation from the council or the community that should be turned into housing. I don't know the term of the lease, but if anybody wants us to look into it, I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Sure.
All right, appreciate the answers to those questions. Steve, thank you for keeping track of them and bringing them forward. All right, now let's go to Commissioner and Council Member comments. This is, again, input, thoughts. Brevity is applauded and appreciated, but let's have at it. So Brenda, do you mind kicking it off?
I don't mind at all. I will try to keep this brief. I'm going to go through the 5 questions and offer my comments as to the larger approach that I'd like to see applied to these areas with possible zoning modifications. I'll just start by saying, though, on a number of occasions, both the Planning Commission and the Town Council have made arguments that development should be allocated, as much as possible to the center of town, and more specifically in and around the commercial areas of Moraga and Reams centers. And this, of course, would not only help us maintain our green hills and open space and beautiful views of the ridgelines, but it would also serve to facilitate the development of some really livable areas in Moraga. And by that, I mean, residents can live here, they can work, they can shop, they can dine, they can walk, within these more densely developed zones. So I think this housing element update, with this, the town really has the opportunity to proactively guide development for the future of Moraga. And I think that's really important that we are proactive and think far ahead, not 8 years, but 80 years. So for the questions, the first one, MCSP R20 areas, I would choose option B to increase to the maximum density of 30 units that was recommended. That increases the opportunities for more senior housing. Question 2, for MCSP office residential, I would choose option A to increase the density to 24 units per acre. I also would consider the FAR option. I would want to vet that a little bit more, but I really like the idea, the advantage of creating the density, but also of having a little bit more, more options for character and livable design in the units. We don't want to see cookie cutter units. We want to see architecture and, interest. Same with the MCSP retail residential zone for number 3. Same option, 24 units. Also the FAR I would consider because of those, for those same reasons. With the MCSP question number 4, commercial Moraga Ranch plan development, I would opt for option C, which is to keep this zoning as is and not allow any housing in this area. This is the intersection of 2 scenic corridors, and I would really like to avoid any tunneling effect that could come about from, clustering these really tall structures and housing on these corners at that intersection. I'd like to keep this the small commercial center and, create more opportunity for a lot more retail and restaurants for Moragans, and as the population increases with development, we're hoping to get those amenities that Moragans want with retail and restaurants. So I do have a couple caveats, and this, I'm almost done, 2 caveats or conditions that I would tie to my position on increasing the zoning, as I suggested, and we don't have to iron any of these out, but I believe the design guidelines would need to be more specific regarding height, style, variation, color, all of those things, to make sure that we are keeping these developments Moraga-esque. It is important to develop, but we also really need to focus on developing in a beautiful way because it's already a beautiful town. We do not want to ruin it. The next caveat would be with the potential for this very dense growth, I strongly recommend that there be language included in the code that requires developers to either add or improve roads based on some agreed upon trigger. Traffic's an issue. Also, establish a fund or a specific fee that the town can bank with each new development for new schools or school expansion. And I say each development so that the burden of a new school, for instance, wouldn't be placed on the last developer by default because they happen to have met the threshold for population increase. So lastly, I just want to say I'm really excited about that balancing tool that's going to come out. I'm excited to do it, look at it, and I think the public will really be engaged if they can learn about it.
Brenda, did you have any comments on the Ream Center?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped the Ream, didn't I? That's the last one, number 5. Yes, I think that we should make all 3 districts multifamily mixed use retail. Again, emphasis on our ability to keep the design within Moraga-esque, boundaries.
Okay, thank you. Carrie.
Hi, so I'm going to try to keep this high level, and I would say that data is helpful in assessing these things. As a statistician would say, compared to what? So when I'm seeing the numbers for the increasing zoning at the Moraga Center, maybe this is because I have my own bias of having formerly lived across from Ream Center and just knowing how underutilized that space is, and also knowing that it took decades to really fully put in place a well thought out plan for the Moraga Center. It sounds a little haphazard the way that we're talking about opportunities at this other potential resource and asset that the community has. It's a gateway to the town. So I would say that in order to really adequately say what would work there, and especially since we just found out the data point tonight that St. Mary's is one of those that might be considering what sounds like it could be, depending on how it rolls out, a fairly exciting development at that location, and resolving a lot of the vehicle miles traveled issues that we're going to face, adding zoning for over 1,000 more units in town. I just think that having more information on Ream Center would be really helpful in the town making wise decisions. As Brenda had indicated previously, 7 generations into the future, what is this going to look like to my grandchildren and great grandchildren? And I think a lot of the decisions on how we choose to rezone these untapped community assets is critical. And also, as Brenda mentioned before, these 2 shopping center areas are really the areas that have the most access to infrastructure and travel. So it is one of those. I can understand that these are the 2 spaces we're talking about. It's just I'm wondering on the balance, and to the point of data also. It would be interesting to see what the traffic impact would have. So loading all of these potential developments at the Moraga Center, when you have another opportunity elsewhere, just trying to think again about traffic patterns. Folks that may live on that side of town may be commuters more to San Francisco. Folks that live on the Ream side of town may be more focused on commuting to Walnut Creek and in the Tri-Valley. So I'm just wondering, again, for those types of things, what data from the community or from potential home buyers even on where Moragans are commuting to when they're commuting to work. And then again, just playing a really keen eye on ways that we can help to not make the traffic a complete and total nightmare worse than it is, including ideas like lived workspaces, which are something. It's the way the economy is moving. You can't fight the future, and that's one of the things that I think a lot more folks are inclined to do. And many of us have our own home offices where we have been working through the pandemic. So to the questions, I think I don't know that we have enough information. I don't have enough information to properly assess for one, knowing question one, knowing that it I think you could be open to it, but again, compared to what? If the only options we're seeing at the MCSP, it's hard for me to really judge based on the others. And I think the same for me would go for question 2. Let's see. I'm not be sure I missed these all. Question 4. Again, I would say that couches it in, and I'm sorry to take this as kind of like a passover on this, but I don't think I have enough information, especially considering the clear and obvious opportunities that there might be at Ream Center, but no knowledge on how that might impact how livable our community is. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Marcus, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, you did. Thank you, Mayor Sauce. Okay, in the interest of brevity, I'll start by referring to table 4 on page 19. I'm in favor of changing all zoning to meet the numbers in table 4. This is a housing element that we're looking to put in place. And it was clearly stated on page 2, the allocation in the element does not mean the town has to build these units, but it must demonstrate that the zoning is in place for the target to be met. And I think that's important that we talk about that. That's the objective of what we're trying to accomplish here. So that's where I'm leaning. I think one of the other things that really struck a chord, and I've heard it a number of times when we talk as a planning commission, is we talk about what can we do to make Moraga more of a college town? And I think I always think about, all right, well, what is it? And then I go back, maybe 20, 30 years when I was a student and I think about it, and it's housing, it's access to restaurant, it's access to bars, it's access to things that we did when we were students. We have to think about that, right? What are the things that we enjoyed doing when we were students and what kept us in an area? So I think it's important that we think about that and thinking about the Ream, the Ream Center and how close it is to St. Mary's. I think that's one of the approaches that we could take. What could we do within the Ream Center from a residential standpoint and from a student standpoint to make it more encouraging? So those are my comments in the interest of brevity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus. Carl.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to ask to modify Chair Lester's 30 DUA and say I would support that if it were specifically for seniors, which I believe we already have. 30 DUA for senior residences is quite in keeping with every town planning action in the last 6 years that I'm aware of. And I see no real problem with that at all. The other thing I'd like to speak to is looking at using FAR rather than DUA as a measure. Back in the 70s, throughout the Bay Area, we were able to enjoy a lot of Section 8 housing units dropped in the middle of middle income, single family dwelling residential districts. Berkeley still gets to enjoy several of these, and they've had very mixed results. One of the things that would have mitigated those mixed results of those 1970s Section 8 developments is if those developments had been planned for anybody other than the most needy people. And if we were to allow our very low and low income units to be developed in such a way to where there's a mix of class and culture, we are more likely to have a happy outcome, I believe, than we will if we build a unit that is designed to accommodate those without means. If we design facilities for a mix of people, we will create a happier community. And the way that I see, based on the information presented tonight, the way that I see that we can do that, rather than replicating the social efforts of the 70s, is through FAR rather than DUA assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Do any other planning commissioners want to speak? Ben?
Thank you, Mayor Sauce. First, I think everyone's complimented staff. I'm also impressed with the level of detail in these reports, and I'm learning something new every time we get together. But focusing tonight on how to achieve compliance with the overall housing update, you're really focusing us down on the deficit of the 556 very low, and moderate. And then when you add on the buffer, that gets us up to the 18. And I'd just like to go back to look at the ADUs because I think they're really low hanging fruit. And I'm really attracted to the affordable by design component. And in your staff report on page 5, you cite that between 2018 and 2021, we produced 3 to 4 ADUs. And you extrapolate from there that, you know, we're going to produce up to 48 over 8 years. And that seems really reasonable. But last night, we got a really detailed report from the town on the annual general plan report. And it says, yes, they completed 2 ADUs this year, which would fall in line with that rationalization. But I think what's showing is that the ADU ordinance that was passed in 2020 is starting to show an uptick. There were 2 more ADUs that were permitted, and there were in fact 7 that were entitled. So I think we're being a little conservative in our estimates of what ADUs could come. And I say that also anecdotally because going around town just talking to people, I'm hearing more and more people talk about the possibility of putting ADUs in their backyard. So if just this last year we entitled 7, I don't think it would be a hard stretch to say we're going to do 10 a year. And that suddenly doubles the number of ADUs that we think we're going to produce over the next 8 years. And I know it's only working on the edges, but every little bit counts. And that would get us more very low and more moderate. So I just hope we can go back and look at that and make sure we're not being too conservative on our ADU estimates. As it relates to the discussion on FAR in lieu of a max density, I'm in favor of looking into that. However, I caution that just because we get rid of a max density doesn't mean that we have to have some type of controls, and FAR control is really form-based zoning. And that's not an easy guideline and zoning controls to just come up with. And that's a lot of work. And I just caution how much effort are we going to have to put in to come up with this form-based zoning so we can justify not having a max ADU, or I'm sorry, a max density. You know, what are we getting for all that effort? Again, I'm not against it. I'm just want to make sure we go in with our eyes wide open and understand how much work we're committing ourselves to. And if we are going to do form-based zoning, then it needs to be done thoughtfully and intentionally. In terms of the housing opportunity sites, I love the strategy that you guys are utilizing, which is to not concentrate in one area and look at spreading it out evenly in different areas. So no one portion of town is carrying the burden of these identified sites. And going to the 5 questions, which Brenda reminded me we're supposed to answer 5 questions. Number 1 was on the Moraga Center specific plan, the 2 areas that are designated R20A and R20B. We're going from 20 to 24. I'm certainly encourage us to look at that, and I would be encouraging us to study it further. Number 2 is the Moraga Center specific plan, office and residential, again, increasing from 20 it allows now to 24. I think that's also worth looking at. The Moraga Center specific plan, retail and residential. I believe that's going from 20 to 24. I think I'm also in favor of that, but I think we do need to preserve our retail character. And I'm sure there's a way that Barry and everyone else can come up where we allow for residential, but we're still preserving the character. And then in the number 4, the Moraga Center specific planned commercial, Moraga Ranch and PD districts. I'm open to looking into it, but I would want to make sure that we are preserving the Moraga Ranch overlay district character. I think that's an important character feature of the town, and I would hate for us to lose it. But I'm sure there's a way you could have both and focus the opportunities in other portions of that zoning district. And then finally, in terms of the Ream Shopping Center, I'm also supportive of exploring that further. And that is all.
Thanks, Ben. All right, Graham.
Fumbling for the mute button. Apologies.
No worries.
Yeah, just like to second what Commissioner Helber spoke to on accessory dwelling units. I past worked for a couple different modular and prefab companies that have launched product lines specific to accessory dwelling units. And I do think that there is a lot of opportunity in a town like Moraga for rental units or affordable design units, either for seniors, small families, student housing. I think that's definitely a low-hanging fruit and a good way to strategize about adding housing units to existing single-family home lots. All in all, I think I'm in favor just with general increases in the R20 to R24s across the majority of the sites as identified, and just seconding the interest of preserving the character of both the retail and the Moraga Ranch areas as well too. Just something that we need to do tactfully as a group through Planning and Design Commission. So that's it.
Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate the brevity.
Sure.
Nick.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm getting some feedback. And also thank you to Barry and the staff. I thought the report and presentation was excellent. And did want to just make a comment that I appreciate everyone else on here's passion. As a new member to this commission, it's great to see everyone's passion, and certainly as a resident of Moraga, it fills me with pride and gives me hope. So appreciate everything that everyone is doing here. One thing that Chair Luster commented on is thinking towards not just 8, but 80 years down the future. Barry has identified some key infill sites. And I think what my comment would be to think long-term on that and not under-deliver what could be a key part of this town, and make sure that what we do there is not just satisfying the next 8 years, but satisfying the 80 years and the future for this town. A couple other key things I heard. I really like the idea of more collaboration with St. Mary's. That's a big appeal to living in this town. And I do think that key traffic issues that have been brought up, I think there's a lot to be said about keeping the students here, not just for that, but also for culture and tax dollars, frankly, and sense of community in the town. And then without digging too deep and trying to stay brief, my preference would be to focus on the shopping centers, because that's where the key infrastructure exists in the town. And I think that's a key area of focus, as I said in my 80-year plan. So thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And welcome to the team. All right. Teresa has had her hand up for a long time. I wasn't ignoring you, Teresa. I was just wanting to give the planning commissioners a chance to go first.
Thank you. I thought I just had it up and I think that was a good idea. Good job. So I'll try to answer the questions too. And I think the one thing that we want more than anything is we want to keep this town pretty. We want to have charm. And we have lots of natural beauty. And with adding all of these buildings, I think we need kind of a theme. I think the Ream Shopping Center has that going on. It's a Spanish style. And I think that's very attractive. And I would want to continue with that. And I think I'm going to start with the Ream Shopping Center and go the other direction. So starting with the Ream Shopping Center, I love the idea of St. Mary's College being part of that and having a seat at the table. And of course, the owners of the shopping centers as well. And I think that area, if you think about traffic and fire, that area has 3 exits going out of town: up Ream, down Ream to St. Mary's Road to Lafayette, and then also Moraga Road to Lafayette. So I would be in favor of putting, I think we have 150 or something. I would be in favor of upping that number to over 200, because I think that's the safest direction for people to get out of town in a fire. So safety is always my number one. And of course, charm is part of that as well. And let me see. I think one other thing too, I think that those owners there are kind of wanting to get this done in a timely manner. So that's really important too. And as many have said, I would like this to be a college town. I think we have so much to gain by that. So, and I think that that should be, well, first of all, it's flat land, which the other side is not. And I would like it to be, I can't see the wording, but it to be kind of surgical, so that, and I know that the staff said that that's not the direction that they would like it to be, but I think that that would serve us well, because then we wouldn't have so many businesses that are doing well there having to leave their business. So, and then we would have a smaller footprint of the buildings as opposed to across the board. So I think that would work well. Going to the other side of town, I think the 20 dwelling units, the 2A and the 2B, I'm fine with 24 A and B, but I think Dave Berzoni brought up a good thought, and that doesn't mean that that's developable. I've walked that property with Dave and Joan, which was a wonderful opportunity. And the flat land along the creek, it is flat, but then it goes really steep. And so I think there would be a tremendous amount of grading that would have to take place for that to be 24 or 30 dwelling units per acre. It doesn't lend itself, it's not flat, it doesn't lend itself to high density, in my humble opinion. I think the other ones, sides, the 3 dwelling unit per acre and the 12 dwelling unit per acre on that orchard are possible, but I question if it's possible to do that type of development that would be walkable. If you're talking about seniors in that area, that would not be walkable at all. So I think there has to be a lot of consideration as to what is actually possible and what would serve our needs and the residents' needs. So that's a concern of mine. And also, when you look at the safety, you have one road going out on that side of town. You have just going through Orinda. I mean, sure, you can go the other direction. And I think Canyon is not a viable source. Now going to question number 2, office residential, which is map B. I think we want to keep in mind that office residential, the way it looks on the map, it's right along the road. And we have standards that put that 40 feet back. which would be the same as the very end of Sansara, like next to the gas station. And those are our standards. And I want to make sure that we keep those standards, because that keeps, that makes it so that we're not so dense. It doesn't look so dense anyway. It keeps it pretty. Okay, and I didn't say this, but at the beginning, or at one of the biggest questions is, do we want the 1,135 or do we want 800? And I would definitely say 800, not more than that. And going to question number 3, residential zone, I think we need to leave room for parking and shops, especially along the creek. You know, if you think of San Antonio, we have that opportunity. So I would be very careful about housing there unless it's above shops, which could be very charming, but I think we have to be really careful about that. And number 4, map D, should multifamily housing be permitted in these zones? And this is commercial, Moraga Ranch, planned development zones. And I would say no housing, because we have a unique opportunity. These are so many acres, and we could have, you know, some really special things in that farm area, in the ranch area, that no other town would have the opportunity to do, because they have, the land is already used. So I think that just gives us a tremendous opportunity to have charm and to have interesting community things going on there. And also we need the shops and we need the parking. And so if we have housing everywhere, we're not going to have space. We're going to be like Lafayette, where 45% of the traffic is trying to find a parking place. We don't want to do that. So I would be very careful about having housing there. I don't think we'll need it. We'll make our numbers without that. So rezone. Okay, so I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Teresa. All right, who would like to go next? Mike?
Sure. Again, thank you very much to staff. This is a lot of work. When I first saw it, it was a little intimidating, but staff was very helpful to work through it. And I think I have at least a little bit of an understanding of it. Also surveys, great job. You know, I love surveys, and I actually agree with the resident that made the comment. I think we can do even more. So at the beginning of the meeting tonight, the town manager said she really wants to hear our vision. So briefly, just a little bit about the vision that I see for housing. A variety of housing types for all income levels, professions, and ages, providing an equal opportunity for all, focused in our town centers, and without using town finances for subsidies. Also, we would accomplish this while maintaining the key core values of the residents of Moraga and the reasons they moved here. We will also balance and offset the negative impacts to our roads, congestion, school, fire safety, and evacuation. As I go through and make some comments here, I want to make sure these comments, they're very preliminary, because, you know, I give a lot of weight to what the residents say, and I give a lot of weight to property owners, you know, being stakeholders, and we don't have that, as well as we heard a little bit from St. Mary's. So the information tonight and the impression tonight could change. So be careful how strong we interpret this. Interesting conversation about FAR versus density. I really wasn't familiar with that. I'm a little concerned though. FAR to me provides less clarity. Also, if I understand it right, you know, the concept of tiny homes, 100 to 200 square feet, is pretty popular. So I take an acre lot, I could have 200 2-square-foot homes, and I wonder if that really fits. So I'm still open to listening and getting more information, but my initial sense is density provides more clarity for all of us, and I think it meets the goals that we all want to achieve. I was very pleased and delighted to hear Planning Commissioner Chair Brenda Lester on her 3 caveats. And I'd like to fully endorse those caveats of strong design guidelines to ensure our beauty, roads, and schools. Turning to the question in front of us, question number 1. I support that, but I do have the concern that Teresa raised. that area. There's some flat area for, increasing density, I think, to 24 DUA. But as you go up that hill's one of the most visible spots of this town. Moraga Road, Moraga Way, the town center, the Commons Park. So I'm concerned, but for now, at least, I'm going to support that for 24 DUA. Number 2, for both office residential and retail residential, I support those at 24 DUA. I believe we should leave the Moraga Ranch as is, the planned development as is, and commercial as is. So no development there. Moving to the Ream Center, I support all 3 proposals in the staff report to allow residential. And then just doing some perspectives here, that gives you 958 units. I support the concepts of what we're doing here. I don't support the numbers. A 400% increase, 1-lane roads, no transportation centers, no job centers, fire, traffic. So I really don't want to have to do any more units than the minimum. I want to do the goal, but not the number of units. And I think the residents have spoken loud and clear on what they'd like us to do. So I'd actually like to use the minimum buffer at 15% instead of 20. That would reduce the 800 units. And how we get there, I guess we could talk about in the further. And when I did the ratio between the 2 centers, from what I just said yes and no to, the Moraga Center would have 688, Ream would have 270. So that ratio seems to be pretty good. And I like to make one final request here. There's no requirement that what we zone low and very low that the property owners are going to build, right? And we don't want to zone something and they don't build it. And, so what have we accomplished? So I really think this is a partnership with residents, the town, and the property owners to say, how can we actually build something that's at least somewhat reasonable going in? So my request, I see in the next step, staff's going to talk to the property owners and the residents, and I think that's great. But I would like to have a formal meeting with the town council, invite the planning commission and the property owners. I'd like to have a direct conversation, a give and take back and forward, because I want to get a feeling that, we're doing this together and maybe getting even a bit better understanding of their needs and how we can actually accomplish the low and very low. I think that would be a very productive session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Steve, you've had your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to compliment the input of all the other commissioners and town council members. I really do value excellent input. So I really consider that at this point, we're in a data gathering phase, and that phase is incomplete. And because of that, I'm wary of trying to answer those questions, albeit I have answers and I'll provide those tomorrow or on Friday to staff. But I'm not going to focus on those tonight. But I do want to address a number of things. One of the things is that as we go forward, and this echoes a little bit what Mike just said, we need to make sure we do not ignore the potential moderate and above moderate housing that right now is sort of set aside, because that housing, especially as inclusionary zoning, may be one way to get a significant amount of the very low and low income housing. So addressing that and addressing that with the landowners, I think, is important. There are a number of important considerations. Just sort of stating the obvious, number of factors drive locating the affordable housing along Moraga Way and Moraga Road corridors. I support that. It has been ever since the 90s and being on the design review board, it has been very evident, and again, stating the obvious, that Moraga is overbuilt in commercial. We are overbuilt in commercial, and if we can use this exercise, this 6th cycle of RHNA to, really change that, if we can, we should try to do that. And that may mean zoning to encourage converting unused, underused commercial. I know that it's not an easy thing to do. It is being done. So I'm favor that. Another factor, another consideration is that Moraga is deficient in independent senior housing, especially housing that avoids stairs by inclusion of elevators or other means. There is no independent senior housing in Moraga that has elevators. And while I was on the Planning Commission, one was proposed and we were really excited. Other factors, stopped the developer from pursuing it. That would have been a great addition to Moraga and would give seniors opportunities to downsize without going into assisted living, maintaining their independence, and helping the cascading effect of helping out homeowners and potential homeowners. I don't have a firm decision yet or recommendation with regard to FAR versus density criteria. There is more data gathering to be done, and I know that the staff is pursuing this. I'd like to plant the seed of staff coming back to the Planning Commission and the Town Council when that is done, and once they have the time to evaluate some of these alternatives with a number of alternative or optional themes, let's call it that. And those themes are going to be made up of these alternatives. For example, right now, if we go max out on all the alternatives, we're going to get far more housing numbers than we need. And if we go the other way, we're going to get far fewer. Well, once you understand the alternatives, you can actually set up a matrix which allows you to follow a number of themes that get you to that answer. And that if they could provide a number of those to the Town Council to evaluate, and these themes, just to try to give you conceptually what it might be weighting the Moraga Center specific plan more, or specific plan area more heavily than Ream, or conversely, Ream more heavily than Moraga Center specific plan, or a balanced case. It might be, can we more widely distribute the very low and low housing? Are there ways to put more emphasis on zoning that will increase the number of a particular area that we're short in, say, independent senior housing? These are evaluations I've done in the past, or technique or tool. I'm happy to talk with staff further about it. I kind of broached it with them. The Hacienda Foundation Board of Directors, we used this approach back in.
Hey, Steve, you've turned your camera off, I think. Can we see you again? There you are. Sorry to interrupt.
You didn't put the dime in the slide.
That's right. You're out of time.
Yes, I'm sure I'm out of time. I think that's where I'll end tonight. Plant a seed, see if we can have brought back to us, instead of one answer, unless there's only one answer, truly one answer, and there's a compelling reason for that one answer. Let's see if there are a couple options that need to warrant consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Sona.
So I think I wanted to just start off with acknowledging and thanking staff for specifically the very thorough and helpful needs assessment, because we all know, of course, we're here having this conversation because of RHNA, and RHNA is there front and center. But what the needs assessment did was really ground this also, not just as this mandate that is frustrating and complex and requires lots of balancing and trade-offs, but the needs assessment brought to the forefront like the human faces, the people who live here, who work here, who there is a need for this and who we do have an obligation to try to solve this problem around being able to live and work here. And touching on Mike's point, which I thought was really, really strong, was around equal opportunity. And that we are doing this in a way that is optimizing for that. And while we know that we have a lot of constraints, I do think that we've heard a lot of good ideas here about maintaining our charm in a way that we have the strong design guidelines. I feel strongly about exploring FAR. It was very educational to kind of use that concept of the envelope. And I'd like to dig more into that because I do think the flexibility it provides is worthwhile exploring in order to optimize for these things that we've all laid out today. Going to the specific decisions, I'll start with the ones that I feel I have strong alignment around, and then kind of move to the ones that I think I need to hear more about, but have general thoughts. So when it comes to Ream, I think it's a clear yes on staff's recommendation. And hearing Teresa's point about even upping the housing there, I'm open to that conversation too, because I think that this is an area that has so much potential, is in an area where people can exit through multiple routes. And importantly, just allows us to really do and engage with St. Mary's, which is important and which everyone here has already acknowledged, to really kind of, again, bring the college energy and vibe into this space. For number 4, I really think that we should just leave it as is for a lot of the reasons that were already stated, but also just because I am concerned about the parking issues. And I know thank you to staff for keeping us in line when framing this, as we're not getting into the weeds on those, but I can foresee some challenges that I just can't look past. And so I think that there's opportunity though to add housing in these other areas. I feel that upping to 24 is a definite yes in my mind. Whether we up it to 30 for the question number 1, I think I'm on the fence there in terms of senior housing and upping that to 30. I'm on the fence just because of some of the reasons around like walkability and is this the right area for that? But I'm open to that. But kind of recapping that I am very in favor of staff's recommendation to increase to 24 DUA. I can see for option 3 or for question 3, I can see, us going with building housing here or zoning for housing here, even housing above shops could be the right direction. I'm open. I'm still sort of aligning my thoughts on those. But in general, I feel that we've heard a lot already about St. Mary's, so I won't repeat the engagement that I think is important there. And then just kind of circling to a point that Planning Commissioner Hillis brought up that I actually really resonated with me, and I would like to ask for more exploration around the live workspaces. I think this really is the future of how a lot of people are working. And to be able to be in an area and grab a coffee, go work out at 24 Fitness, but also be working and interacting with all different types of people, all in that course of your workday. I think that's just like a vision for Moraga that I can stand behind. That's it for me.
Thank you, Sona. All right, I guess I'm the one who stands between everyone going home and the meeting. I'll be brief. What's that?
In our workspaces?
to your live workspaces, yes. Let me just play cleanup here. I want to echo the thanks to staff and consultants for once again taking a mountain of material analysis data and distilling it to its essence so that we could have the productive and useful conversation that we've had tonight. And I want to thank all the commissioners and council members for your engagement and for your thinking and commitment to this. It's fantastic. I also want to thank the members of the public who are here tonight and those who have participated in the meetings and the workshops that we've had to date, the 550 of you who have completed the questionnaire, the housing survey. Know that your input is critical to this process and to helping shape the future of this town. This is a fantastic opportunity before us. We have an opportunity to create two vibrant residential commercial communities in the areas of the Ream Shopping Center and the Moraga Shopping Center. These areas can provide housing choices for our seniors, employees of Moraga businesses, our teachers, young families who are drawn to our excellent schools, and people who want to be part of this community, but who are foreclosed right now from doing so because of economic circumstances. These centers can drive more retail. They'll allow for strolling and for gathering around a cup of coffee, a beer, or a meal outside. And it's going to create opportunities for sensible transportation alternatives to single occupancy car trips. So against that backdrop, I very much like that the opportunity sites that have been identified are at the two commercial centers of town. And I appreciate that the staff and the consultants heard us when we said, please keep it in the center of town and away from our residential areas on the outskirts of town and our space areas, because those areas are more visually sensitive, they're environmentally more sensitive, and they're more challenging from a fire and safety and evacuation perspective. So as to the zoning districts that have been proposed as opportunity sites, I mean, my thoughts are consistent with what many of the council members and commissioners have said. I think that in the Moraga Center specific plan area, that the R20, the MCSP office residential, and the retail residential areas should be moved to a designation of 24. Whether we do that in the mixed use areas with FAR or with the zoning designation, I would like to have a little more exploration on that, and I would like to better understand the pros and cons of each approach, with the end game being that we pave the way for achieving what we're trying to achieve here. As to the rest of the MCSP, the overlay, the commercial area, and the I'm forgetting another one, but the three that don't allow for development, I agree that those should remain as is. As to the Ream Shopping Center, I wonder if we should push harder on that area. That area strikes me as being a big opportunity. First of all, I think it is vastly underutilized right now. Second of all, to Teresa's point, it has easy access and easier egress. There's the connection with St. Mary's, both because they are a property owner and they are so close. So I would very much like to see us do as much as we can in the Ream Shopping Center. And I also wonder if it takes a little pressure off the other side of town, because as staff and the consultants identified in the report, some of the sites that we're talking about over there are over 10 acres. And so query from the state standpoint, how they're going to feel about that. So, I would love to see that part of town be revitalized in a big way. And I think this is the opportunity to do that. So going forward, I think that the plan for reaching out to the property owners, continuing to reach out and engage the community are good ones. I look forward to the results of the Balancing Act tool. I look forward to trying it myself, provided I can do that. I just want to thank everyone for this evening's discussion. So is there, I think, Cynthia and Barry, that there is some fairly clear areas where we have all coalesced, and I just want to ask, do you feel like you have gotten sufficient input and feedback this evening?
We've gotten fantastic feedback, and I appreciate you all for really digging into this topic. And I know that it can sometimes be difficult to understand, but no, I'm very impressed with the quality of the feedback, and I thank you. Do you have anything to add, Barry?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody as well. It's been very useful and helpful. I think one of the takeaways is that we will do some more homework on the FAR versus density issue. And when we come back to you, we'll flesh that out a little more and talk a little bit about what the implications are of going one way or the other on that. But I think the direction we have at this point is enough for us to go to the next level, at least in kind of sussing out where the housing opportunity sites specifically are. So thank you for that.
Don't forget, we'll have 2 community meetings towards the end of March, similar topic to gain input from the community, as well as the Balancing Act tool and the housing survey. So.
All right, well, anyone have any other comments? All right, well then, I would like to adjourn the meeting and adjourn it in, what's that?
If I can interrupt very quickly, I'm trying to, I threw out the idea of requesting staff to try to come back with a couple of themes, unless it's a really compelling reason to just come back with one answer. Is there any other members here who are aligned with that? Just show thumbs.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. And I don't think it's that much more work. Maybe I'm wrong, but
We're not going to come back with one answer. We're going to come back with some more information and ask for direction.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for the clarity.
All right, well, I can adjourn this meeting without a motion, right?
Aaron, sorry, I think we do need a motion from each body.
I move we adjourn.
I second.
I'll move the planning commission also adjourn.
I
second.
Okay, so we have from the Planning Commission, we have Commissioner Helber motion, second Commissioner Luster or Chair Luster. From the Town Council, we have motion by the Vice Mayor, a second by McClure. I would also just like to add that I would like to adjourn the meeting in recognition of and in solidarity with the people in Ukraine and what they're going through right now. With that, let's take a roll call vote on the motion. Commissioner Thiel. Do you want to adjourn or should we keep talking? Do you want to keep talking? Yes. Okay.
I'll do his voice. Yes.
Aye. Yes.
Commissioner Bodie.
Inquired about this.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Commissioner Polsky.
Aye.
Okay. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hillis.
Aye.
Chair Luster.
Aye.
Did I get everyone?
Aye.
Commissioner Bodie.
Oh, Commissioner Helber, my apologies. Okay, unanimous on the Planning Commission. Town Council, Councilmember Macker,
Yes.
Councilmember Onoda.
Yes, and I would also like to say that my prayers are with all of the people from Ukraine and all of the people here who have Ukrainian relatives.
Thank you. Councilmember McClure.
Yes.
Vice Mayor. Boy, it is time to end this
Yes.
meeting.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wolke, yes. Mayor Sauces, yes. Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful discussion. Have a good night.
Thank you very much
Thank
for the
you.
feedback. Good night.